Welcome to True Chilling Tales. I know you came to relax, listen, and fall asleep. Before we start, comment below and let me know what time it is with you and where you're watching from. Time for some chilling tales. Lay back, relax, and enjoy. The fluorescent lights in the community center hallway always buzzed a little too loud after 9 p.m. I'd been volunteering there for about 3 months, covering the late shift on Tuesdays and Thursdays, while I saved up for a car. The center stayed open until midnight for the adult education classes and the occasional support group meeting. Most nights I just sat at the front desk, signed people in, handed out room keys, and scrolled through my phone. That particular Thursday was during a heat wave. The kind where the air feels thick even after sunset, and the building's ancient AC couldn't keep up. I'd worn shorts and a tank top, but I was still sweating by the time I clocked in at 8:30. The regular coordinator, Janet, was on holiday, so it was just me and whoever showed up for their classes or meetings. The first 2 hours were normal. In a pottery class in room 3, a book club in the lounge, a few people using the computer lab. I handed out keys, made sure people signed the logbook, and collected them when they left. Standard stuff. By 10:30, most people had cleared out. The pottery class finished up, and the book club ladies waved goodbye as they headed into the car park. That's when he first came to the desk. He was maybe mid-40s, average height, wearing a polo shirt and khakis. Nothing remarkable about him at all. He smiled politely and asked for the key to room 7. I checked the schedule. Nothing booked for room 7 that night, but sometimes people reserved rooms and forgot to write it down. I handed him the key. He thanked me and walked down the hall. I didn't think much of it. My gut wasn't telling me anything at that point. About 15 minutes later, he came back and returned the key. Didn't say a word, just set it on the desk and walked out the front entrance. I put the key back on the pegboard and went back to my phone. 10 minutes after that, he came back in. Same polite smile, same request. "Could I get the key to room 7, please?" I hesitated. "Didn't you just return it?" "Oh, I forgot something," he said. His tone was pleasant, unbothered. I handed him the key again. He walked down the hall. This time I watched him go. He turned the corner toward room 7, and I heard the door open and close. I told myself it was nothing. People forget things. Maybe he left his phone or his wallet. I went back to scrolling, but I kept glancing at the clock. 15 minutes. He returned the key again. No explanation, no small talk. Just set it down and left. I was starting to feel uneasy, but I couldn't put my finger on why. He wasn't doing anything wrong, technically. I figured maybe he was checking the room for some kind of event set up, or maybe he was with the building maintenance and I just didn't know about it. I almost texted Janet to ask, but she was abroad and probably asleep. Then he came back a third time. Same smile, same words. "Could I get the key to room 7? This time I didn't hand it over right away. "Is everything okay? Do you need help with something in there?" No, everything's fine," he said. "Just need to check one more thing." I gave him the key. I don't know why. I think part of me didn't want to seem rude or paranoid. He walked down the hall again, and I heard the door open. But this time, I didn't hear it close. I sat there for a minute, listening. The building was almost silent now. The computer lab had emptied out around 10:45, and I was pretty sure I was alone, except for him. The AC hummed. The fluorescent lights buzzed. I could hear my own breathing. I thought about going down the hall to check, but something in my gut told me not to. I stayed at the desk. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. He didn't come back. I started thinking about calling someone. Not the police. What would I even say? A man is using a room multiple times? But maybe the center's emergency contact. I pulled up the number on my phone but didn't dial. I felt stupid. I was probably overreacting. Then I heard footsteps. Not from the direction of room 7. From the opposite end of the building, near the back exit by the kitchen. Slow, deliberate footsteps on the linoleum. They stopped, then started again. I stood up. My heart was pounding. I called out, "Hello? We're closing soon." No answer. The footsteps stopped. I waited, straining to hear anything. The building was so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the vending machine in the lounge. I thought about leaving the desk, going to check, but every instinct told me to stay put, to stay visible, to stay near the front door. Then I heard the door to room 7 open. Footsteps came back down the hall. He appeared around the corner, still calm, still smiling faintly. He walked up to the desk and set the key down. "Thanks," he said. "Are you done now?" I asked. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "For tonight," he said. He turned and walked out the front entrance. I watched him cross the car park, get into a silver sedan, and drive away. I locked the front door immediately, even though it was only 11:20. Yet I went down the hall to room 7 and opened it. Nothing. Just an empty meeting room. Chairs stacked against the wall, a whiteboard, a table. No sign anyone had been in there at all. I checked the back exit, locked, like it should have been. I checked the kitchen, the computer lab, the lounge. Empty. I locked up early and sat in my car in the car park for 10 minutes before I felt safe enough to drive home. I kept checking my mirrors the whole way. The next week, I asked Janet if anyone had booked room 7 that night, or if there was maintenance scheduled. She said no. I described the man to her. She didn't recognize him. I checked the sign-in sheet from that night. He'd never signed in at all. I still volunteer there, but I don't take the late shift anymore. I told Janet I had scheduling conflicts, which wasn't true. Well, I just couldn't shake the feeling that he was testing something, timing something, watching to see if I'd notice or if I'd leave the desk or if I'd be alone. I still don't know what he was doing in that room or why he kept coming back. And I don't know who was walking around the back of the building while he was in there. I think about it a lot. I think about the fact that I almost didn't lock the door early, that I almost went to check the back hallway by myself, that I talked myself out of calling anyone because I didn't want to seem paranoid. I probably should have trusted my gut sooner. The car park was completely empty when I pulled in. I'd been working late at the office. Some quarterly report that absolutely had to be done by morning, and by the time I left it was past midnight. I live about 40 minutes outside the city, and normally I'd take the main road home, but there'd been an accident earlier that evening. The traffic app was still showing delays, so I decided to cut through the park and ride instead. It's this massive concrete lot on the edge of town, maybe 500 spaces, built for commuters who take the bus in. At night, it's deserted. I work in IT support, nothing glamorous. Most days I'm remote, but when the servers act up, I have to go in. That night I was exhausted, hadn't eaten since lunch, and I just wanted to get home. That the park and ride seemed like a good shortcut. It connects to a back road that would shave off 10 minutes. I'd driven through it a handful of times before, always during the day, never at night. The entrance was lit by a single overhead lamp, one of those sodium ones that makes everything look yellow and sickly. The rest of the car park stretched out into darkness. There were a few lights scattered around the perimeter, but most of them were either broken or too far apart to be useful. I drove slowly, following the painted arrows on the ground. The exit was on the far side, maybe a quarter-mile away. That's when I noticed the other car. It was parked in the middle of the lot, nowhere near the entrance or exit. Just sitting there in the dark. A dark sedan, maybe a Ford or a Vauxhall, I couldn't tell, no lights on. But I slowed down as I passed it, maybe 30 feet away. I couldn't see anyone inside, but the windows were tinted. I told myself it was probably someone who'd broken down, or maybe a taxi driver taking a break. It didn't seem worth worrying about. I kept driving toward the exit. The car park was laid out in a grid with rows of spaces separated by lanes. I was about halfway across when I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw headlights. The sedan had turned on its lights and was moving. Not fast, just rolling forward at maybe 10 miles an hour. I watched it for a second, then looked back at the road. My gut was telling me something was off, but I ignored it. People drive through here all the time. It wasn't weird. I reached the exit and realized it was blocked. There was a chain-link gate across it, padlocked shut. And a sign next to it said, "The exit was closed for resurfacing work and wouldn't reopen until the following week." I must have missed the notice at the entrance. I sat there for a moment, trying to decide what to do. I'd have to turn around and go back the way I came. It wasn't a big deal, just annoying. I did a 3-point turn and started driving back toward the entrance. That's when I saw the sedan again. It had parked in the exact spot where I'd been sitting a minute earlier, right in front of the blocked exit. The headlights were still on, pointed at me. I couldn't see the driver. I slowed down, unsure whether to stop or keep going. My instinct was to keep moving, so I did. As I passed the sedan, I looked over. The driver's side window was down. I couldn't make out a face, just a silhouette. They didn't move, didn't wave or call out. I just sat there. I sped up a little, my hands tight on the wheel. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe they were lost, or waiting for someone. Maybe they thought I worked there and were expecting me to help. I didn't stop to find out. I was about 3/4 of the way back to the entrance when I checked my mirror again. The sedan was following me. Not speeding, not tailgating, just maintaining the same distance, maybe 50 feet behind. I pressed the accelerator and picked up speed. The sedan did the same. My heart started pounding. I thought about calling the police. But what would I even say? Someone's driving behind me in a car park? It sounded ridiculous. I figured I'd just get out of there and forget about it. Then the entrance lights went out, all of them, all at once, of them, all at T. Yet the yellow glow that had been guiding me back disappeared, and suddenly I was driving in near total darkness. I slammed on the brakes and sat there, trying to process what had just happened. Maybe it was on a timer. Maybe the council shut them off at midnight to save money. I didn't know. I turned on my high beams and kept going. Slower now. The exit was only a couple 100 feet away. The sedan was still behind me. I could see its headlights in my mirror, steady and unblinking. I reached the entrance and swung left, heading for the road. I was almost out. I felt a wave of relief, and then I saw it. The sedan had overtaken me somehow and was now parked across the entrance, blocking it. I don't know how it got there so fast. I hadn't seen it pass me. But there it was, sitting sideways across the lane, headlights pointed at my windshield, and I stopped. My hands were shaking. I couldn't see the driver, but I knew they were watching me. I reversed, thinking I'd find another way out, maybe drive over the curb or through a gap in the fence, but as I backed up, the sedan started moving again. It turned and followed me. Slowly, deliberately. Every time I stopped, it stopped. Every time I moved, it moved. I tried the entrance twice more. Both times, the sedan got there first. I don't know how. It was like they knew where I was going before I did. My phone had no signal. It never does in that part of town. And I couldn't call anyone. I thought about ramming the sedan, but I didn't know if my car could take it, and I didn't know what the driver would do if I tried. Finally, I just drove. I picked a random direction, away from the entrance and the blocked exit, and floored it. And I drove across empty parking spaces, over speed bumps, past the darkened ticket machines. The sedan followed. I could hear my tires screeching on the concrete. My gut was screaming at me to get out, but I didn't know how. Then I saw it. A service road along the edge of the car park, half hidden behind a row of bushes. It was narrow, barely wide enough for one car, but it looked like it led out to the main road. I didn't think. I just turned and drove. The bushes scraped against my doors, and I heard something crack. Maybe a mirror, I don't know. I didn't look back. I just kept going. The service road spat me out onto a residential street I didn't recognize. I drove for another 10 minutes, taking random turns until I was sure the sedan wasn't behind me anymore. Then I pulled over and sat there shaking. I wanted to call the police. But what would I tell them? I didn't have a license plate number. I didn't even have a good description of the driver. And nothing had actually happened. They hadn't hurt me. They hadn't even spoken to me. They just followed me. I never went back to that car park. I take the main road now, even when there's traffic. I still don't know who was driving that sedan or what they wanted. Maybe it was some kind of game to them. Maybe they were just messing with me, but I don't think so. I think if I hadn't found that service road, I'd still be in that car park, and I don't know what would have happened then. I still think about it sometimes. Late at night when I'm driving home alone, I check my mirrors more than I used to. And every time I see headlights behind me, I get this sinking feeling in my stomach because I never got an answer, and I don't think I ever will. The dashboard clock read 2:14 a.m. when I pulled off the motorway. I'd been driving for nearly 6 hours straight, coming back from my sister's place in Bristol. She'd just had her second kid, and I'd stayed longer than planned helping out. My back was killing me, and I needed coffee badly. The service station was one of those big ones with a Burger King and a WH Smith, but at this hour, only the petrol station shop was open. I pulled into a bay near the entrance, killed the engine, and sat there for a minute, just stretching my neck. The car park was maybe a quarter full, a few lorries over in the HGV section, some cars scattered around. Normal for a Tuesday night. I grabbed my phone and checked my messages. Nothing urgent. My girlfriend had texted around midnight asking if I was okay, and I sent back a quick reply saying I'd stopped for a break and would be home in an hour or so. That's when I noticed the headlights. A dark saloon, looked like a Mondeo or something similar, had pulled into the bay directly across from mine. Not unusual. Plenty of spaces around, but some people just park wherever. The headlights stayed on for a few seconds, then cut out. I couldn't see much through their windscreen because of the glare from the station lights, but I got the sense someone was sitting there, probably doing the same thing I was, taking a break from driving. I got out and walked toward the shop. The air was cold and damp, that particular kind of February chill that gets into your bones. There was hardly any wind, just quiet. The fluorescent lights inside the station buzzed faintly, I could hear the hum of the refrigerators before I even opened the door. Inside, there was one guy behind the counter, maybe early 20s, scrolling on his phone. I nodded at him and he barely looked up. I went straight for the coffee machine, poured myself a large black, grabbed a Twix from the shelf, paid with contactless. The whole thing took maybe 3 minutes. When I came back out, the Mondeo was gone. I didn't think much of it. I walked back to my car, got in, sipped my coffee. It was terrible, but it was hot. I sat there for a few minutes, letting the caffeine start to work, scrolling through my phone. Then I decided I should probably move closer to the exit so I wouldn't have to navigate the car park when I was ready to leave. Easier to just pull straight out onto the slip road. And I started the engine and drove slowly across the car park to a bay near the exit. There were only 2 other cars in that section, both empty as far as I could tell. I reversed in, turned off the engine again. Maybe 10 seconds later, headlights swung into the bay directly opposite mine. The same car, the dark Mondeo. I stared at it. The headlights stayed on for a moment, then cut out again. I couldn't see the driver clearly, but I could make out a shape behind the wheel, just sitting there. My gut tightened a little. It was weird, right? I mean, there were loads of empty spaces. Why park right across from me again? I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe they were just tired, not paying attention to where they parked. Maybe they'd moved for the same reason I had. Closer to the exit, it was a coincidence. And I finished my coffee and checked the time. 2:26 a.m. I needed to get moving. I had work in the morning and I was already going to be running on about 4 hours of sleep. But something made me hesitate. That feeling you get when you know something's off, but you can't quite put your finger on it. I looked at the Mondeo again, still just sitting there. No one getting out, no movement. I started my engine and pulled out of the bay. I drove slowly to the far side of the car park, near the lorry section, and pulled into a space between 2 empty vans. I turned the engine off and waited. 30 seconds, maybe less. The Mondeo's headlights came on. It rolled across the car park and pulled into the bay directly across from me again. My heart started pounding. That wasn't a coincidence, that was deliberate. I sat there staring at the car, yet the driver didn't get out, didn't do anything, just sat there with the engine running, headlights off now. I couldn't see their face, couldn't tell if they were looking at me or not, but I knew they were. I should have called the police right then. I had my phone in my hand. I even unlocked it and opened the keypad, but what was I going to say? Someone's parking near me? They'd think I was insane. I hadn't been threatened. No one had approached me. Technically, nothing had happened. I locked my doors. All of them were already locked. But I pressed the button again, just to be sure. My hands were shaking a little. I decided to try one more thing. I started the engine and pulled out, driving toward the exit lane like I was leaving. I watched my mirrors. The Mondeo didn't follow immediately. I felt a tiny flicker of relief. Well, maybe they'd gotten bored. Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. But then, just as I was about to turn onto the slip road, I saw the headlights in my rearview mirror. They were following me. I didn't pull onto the motorway. At the last second, I veered back into the car park, looping around toward the petrol pumps. My heart was hammering now. The Mondeo followed, keeping a steady distance behind me, maybe 20 meters back. I pulled up right in front of the shop entrance, as close as I could get to the doors, and turned off my engine. I grabbed my phone and my keys and got out fast, half running to the door. I glanced back once. The The Mondeo had stopped in the middle of the car park, just sitting there, engine running. Inside, the same guy was still behind the counter. I must have looked rattled because he actually put his phone down. You all right?" he asked. I opened my mouth to explain, but I didn't even know where to start. "There's a car," I said. "They keep following me, parking next to me." He looked past me, out through the windows. "Which one?" I turned to point, but the Mondeo was gone. The car park was empty except for my car and the lorries in the far section. "It was just there," I said. "A dark Mondeo. They were right behind me." The guy frowned. "I didn't see anyone come in. You want me to check the cameras?" I nodded, but I felt stupid. He disappeared into the back for a minute, then came back shaking his head. "Cameras only cover the pumps and the entrance. Can't see the main car park from here." I stood there for a while, just watching through the windows. The guy offered to walk me to my car, but I said no. I didn't want to seem more paranoid than I already did. Eventually, I went back out, got in my car, locked the doors, and drove straight onto the motorway without stopping. I checked my mirrors every few seconds for the next 40 minutes. I never saw the Mondeo again. I got home just after 3:30 a.m. I didn't tell my girlfriend what happened. I'm still not sure what did happen, honestly. Maybe it was just someone messing with me. Maybe they thought it was funny. But I keep thinking about the way they followed me to every single bay. The way they just sat there, not getting out, not doing anything, just watching. I still use that service station sometimes when I'm driving late. I haven't seen the car again. But every time I stop, I make sure to park right in front of the shop, under the lights, where someone can see me. And I don't stay long. The power went out at 9:47 p.m. I remember because I just checked my phone to see how much longer I had before the library closed at 10. I was a graduate student working part-time as a library assistant, mostly evening shifts, because the pay was slightly better, and it fit around my seminar schedule. Tuesday nights were usually dead, maybe 3 or 4 people total after 8 o'clock, mostly other grad students who'd commandeered study carrels for the semester. I was in the middle of reshelving returns on the 3rd floor when everything went dark. Not gradually, just instant blackness, the kind where you can't see your own hand. The heating system shut off mid-hum. The little green exit sign stayed on, running on battery backup, casting this faint glow that barely reached past the door frames. My phone torch helped. But the battery was already at 38% and I hadn't brought my charger. The protocol was straightforward. If the backup generator didn't kick in within 5 minutes, we were supposed to evacuate the building and lock up. I waited by the circulation desk, listening. The generator was in the basement, and you could usually hear it rumble to life through the floors. Nothing. I gave it the full 5 minutes, then another 2, just to be sure. I did a quick sweep of the ground floor first. Nobody there. The 2nd floor was empty too. Study carrels abandoned. Someone's half-drunk coffee still sitting on a desk. I took the stairs up to the 3rd floor, where I'd been working. That's when my gut started bothering me. Not anything I could name, just this low-level unease. The kind you get when you're alone in a big building and every sound echoes wrong. The 3rd floor had 3 reading rooms off the main corridor. I checked the first 2. Empty, chairs tucked in, lights off. The 3rd reading room was at the far end, past the narrow stacks. I pushed the door open and swept my phone light across the space. 12 tables, wooden chairs, tall windows that showed nothing but black outside. Empty. I pulled the door shut and locked it. We were supposed to lock the reading rooms during closures to keep people from wandering back in if they'd hidden somewhere. I heard the bolt click. Tested the handle. Solid. I was halfway back to the stairs when I heard it. A soft sound, like paper sliding against paper. I stopped. It came again. Definitely the sound of a page turning, slow, deliberate, coming from the third reading room. I stood there for maybe 20 seconds, just listening. My gut was screaming at me to leave, but I told myself it was probably nothing. Old buildings settle. Air pressure changes when doors close. Maybe I'd left a window cracked and the breeze was moving something. I walked back to the reading room door. Locked. Still locked. I pressed my ear against the wood. Nothing at first. Then, there it was again. The distinct sound of a page turning, that crisp whisper of paper on paper, then another. Someone was in there, reading in the dark. I should have called campus security right then. I had my phone in my hand. But I didn't, because what was I going to say? I heard a noise in a room I'd already checked? They'd think I was jumpy because of the blackout, and I'd worked there for 8 months and never had a problem. I figured maybe I'd miscounted during my sweep, missed someone who'd fallen asleep or had headphones in. "Library's closed," I called through the door. "Power's out. You need to evacuate." The page turning stopped. I waited. No response. No footsteps. No movement at all. "Hello? I know you're in there. I need you to come out now." Silence. Complete silence. Then, after maybe 10 seconds, another page turned. My hands were shaking when I unlocked the door. I pushed it open, phone light up, ready to be annoyed at some student who thought they were funny. I swept the beam across every table, every chair, every corner. Empty. Completely empty. No books open on the tables, no bags, no coats. The chairs were all tucked in exactly as I'd left them. I checked under the tables, behind the reference shelves, along the wall. Nothing. No one. I stood there in the middle of the room, my phone light making shadows jump on the walls, and I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. Every instinct told me to get out, but I forced myself to think rationally. Maybe the sound had come from the room next door, carried through the ventilation or the walls. Sound does weird things in old buildings. I left and locked the door again. Checked the other 2 reading rooms one more time. Still empty. I was heading for the stairs when I heard it again. Unmistakable this time. Pages turning. Multiple pages, like someone flipping through a book quickly, coming from the 3rd reading room. I didn't unlock the door this time. I just stood there, staring at it, listening to the sound of pages turning in a locked, empty room. And it went on for maybe 30 seconds, then stopped. That's when I decided I was done. I didn't care if I was overreacting. I went straight down to the ground floor, grabbed my coat and bag from the staff room, and headed for the main entrance. I was halfway across the lobby when I realized I'd left the 3rd floor reading room unlocked. No, I'd locked it. I was sure I'd locked it, but I couldn't remember if I'd locked it the second time, after I'd checked and found it empty. I should have just left. I should have called security from outside and let them deal with it. But I had this image of getting written up for leaving a room unsecured during an evacuation, maybe losing the job I needed to pay rent. So I went back upstairs. The 3rd floor corridor was darker than before, my phone battery down to 21%, and I could see the reading room door from the top of the stairs. It was open. Not wide open, just cracked. Maybe 6 inches. I hadn't left it open. I knew I hadn't. I walked toward it slowly, my phone light barely cutting through the dark. I could hear my own breathing, too loud in the silence. When I reached the door, I stopped. I didn't want to look inside. Every part of me was screaming not to look inside. I looked anyway. The reading room was empty. But on the center table, directly in the beam of my phone light, there was a book. Open. Lying face down like someone had just set it there mid-read. I hadn't seen any books in there before. I was sure of it. I didn't go in. I pulled the door shut, locked it with shaking hands, and left. I took the stairs down 2 at a time, crossed the lobby, and pushed through the main doors into the cold night air. I called campus security from the parking lot and told them I'd completed the evacuation and locked up. I didn't mention the reading room. I didn't mention the sounds. The power came back on around midnight, I heard later. They found the book the next morning when they reopened. Someone had left it on the table, they said. Probably forgot it before the blackout. But I know what I heard. I know that room was empty twice, and I know I locked that door. I requested a schedule change the following week. Day shifts only. I told my supervisor I had evening classes now. She didn't question it. I still work at the library, but I don't go up to the 3rd floor anymore if I can help it. And I've never stayed past 9 p.m. again. Sometimes I think about that night, about the sound of pages turning in the dark. And I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed. If I'd gone into that room when the door was open. I don't know who was in there. I don't know what they wanted. And I really, really don't want to find out. The announcement said 20-minute delay due to signaling issues. That was at 11:43 p.m. I remember because I'd been checking my phone every few minutes, watching the battery drain to 18%. I work in data entry for a logistics company. Nothing glamorous. The office is in a business park outside Reading, and I live in a flat share in Swindon. Most nights I catch the 10:15, but I'd stayed late finishing a backlog of invoices because our system had crashed earlier in the week. My manager sent an email around 9 p.m. saying it all needed to be done by morning. So there I was, alone on the 11:30 service, which had now become the whenever it bloody well starts service. The platform was empty, completely empty. It's a small station, just 2 platforms, a ticket machine, and a waiting room that's always locked after 10 p.m. Well, there's no staff after that either, just CCTV and automated announcements. I was sitting in the second carriage from the front. I'd picked it because the lights were on, and it felt safer than the darker ones further back. The heating was off, though, and I could see my breath. I had my coat zipped up and my bag on the seat next to me. I was scrolling through my phone, trying to distract myself, when I saw someone walk past the window, just a figure, moving from left to right. I glanced up but didn't catch any details, just the sense of someone walking along the platform. I figured it was another passenger, maybe from a different carriage, stretching their legs during the delay. I went back to my phone. A minute or so later, they walked past again. Same direction, left to right. I looked up properly this time, but they'd already passed. And I leaned toward the window and peered down the platform. It was empty. Just the overhead lights, casting long shadows and a few benches. No one there. My gut told me that was weird, but I brushed it off. Maybe they ducked into the waiting room. Except the waiting room was locked. I'd tried it earlier. I went back to scrolling. My phone buzzed. Text from my flatmate asking if I was still out. I replied, said I'd be home soon, though I had no idea if that was true. The train was still sitting there, silent except for the faint hum of something mechanical under the floor. Then I saw them again, left to right, same pace, steady, unhurried. This time I stood up and moved to the window, pressing my face close to the glass. I caught a glimpse, just a dark coat, maybe a hood. They disappeared past the edge of my window before I could see more. Yet I walked to the end of the carriage and looked out through the door window. The platform stretched out in both directions, lit by those harsh yellow lights that make everything look washed out. No one. Absolutely no one. I told myself I was being paranoid. It was late, I was tired, and my brain was playing tricks. Maybe it was a member of staff doing checks, except there was no high-vis, no torch, no clipboard. And why would they keep walking past the same window? I sat back down, but I couldn't focus on my phone anymore. I kept glancing at the window, waiting. My heart was doing this annoying thing where it felt like it was beating too hard, like I could feel it in my throat. 5 minutes passed, maybe 10. I'd started to relax a little when they walked past again. Same direction, same pace. Yes, this time I stood up immediately and moved to the opposite window, the one facing the other platform. If they were walking in a loop, I'd see them cross over or walk back. But there was nothing. The other platform was empty too. Just a digital sign saying the next train wasn't until 6 a.m. I went back to the door window and stared out. My breath fogged the glass. I wiped it with my sleeve. The platform was still. The only movement was a crisp packet skittering along the ground in the wind. Then I saw them standing there, not walking this time, just standing. About 20 feet down the platform, facing the train, facing my carriage. I couldn't see their face. The hood was up and the angle of the light cast their features in shadow. But I could tell they were looking at me. I don't know how I knew, but I did. That feeling you get when someone's staring. Every instinct told me to move away from the window, but I couldn't. I just stood there, staring back. They didn't move, didn't shift their weight, didn't look away, just stood there, hands at their sides, completely still. I stepped back from the window and sat down hard on the seat. My hands were shaking. I pulled out my phone and thought about calling someone. The police, maybe. But what would I say? Someone standing on a train platform? That's not illegal. I'd sound insane. I thought about getting off the train and walking to the ticket hall, but that would mean stepping onto the platform with them. And the ticket hall was locked anyway. The only way out was through the barriers, and my card was in my bag, and I'd have to walk toward them to reach the exit. I stayed in my seat. Yet I kept my eyes on the window, watching for movement. Nothing. They didn't walk past again. I didn't see them move. Another 10 minutes crawled by. The train's PA system crackled to life. Automated voice saying the delay was due to continue, apologizing for the inconvenience. I barely heard it. I was too busy watching the window, my neck stiff from the angle. Then the train lurched. Just a small jolt, but it startled me so badly, I nearly dropped my phone. The engine hummed to life. The lights inside flickered, then steadied. We were moving. I stood up and looked out the window as the platform started to slide past. I scanned for the figure, my eyes darting along the empty benches, the locked waiting room, the ticket machine. They were standing right next to my window. I hadn't heard them approach, hadn't seen them move. Yet, but they were there, inches from the glass, hood still up, face still hidden. The train was picking up speed, and they just stood there, not moving, not waving, not reacting, just watching me go. I stumbled back from the window and sat down, my chest tight. I didn't look out again until the train was well past the station, the platform lights fading into the distance. I got home around 1 a.m. My flatmate was asleep. I locked my bedroom door and didn't sleep much. I reported it the next day, called the train company's customer service line, explained what happened. The woman on the phone was polite, but clearly thought I was overreacting. She said she'd pass it on to the station staff. I never heard back. I don't take that train anymore. I started driving even though the petrol costs more than I can really afford. And I told my manager I couldn't do late shifts anymore. She wasn't happy, but I didn't care. I still don't know who they were or what they wanted. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe they were just another passenger, bored during the delay, and I imagined the rest. But I don't think so. I can still see them standing there perfectly still as the train pulled away. I think about it a lot, more than I should. And I still can't shake the feeling that they knew exactly which window I was sitting behind. The elevator chimed again, fourth time in the last 10 minutes. I work in IT support for a mid-sized insurance company. Not glamorous, but it pays the bills. Most nights I'm out by 6. But that Tuesday, I'd volunteered to stay late and lock up while our building manager was on holiday. Simple enough. Walk each floor, make sure the lights are off, doors locked, alarm set. I'd done it once before about a year ago. Easy money for an extra 2 hours on my timesheet. The building's only got 6 floors. Small compared to the newer ones downtown, but it's old. Built sometime in the 80s. Thick carpets that smell faintly of dust. Those awful fluorescent panels that hum when you're the only one there. Most people cleared out by 5:30. By 7, it was just me finishing up some ticket backlog at my desk on the 3rd floor. And I started my rounds at 8:15. Top floor first, work my way down. The 6th floor is mostly storage and the boardroom. I flicked off the lights, checked the boardroom door, locked, and took the stairs down to 5. Sales department, rows of identical desks, a few sad potted plants, motivational posters about teamwork. I walked through, turned off the lights in sections, checked the kitchenette and the back office. All clear. That's when I heard the elevator. I was standing near the stairwell door when I heard it chime. The little ding that means it's arrived at a floor. I paused, listened. Nothing else. I figured maybe the mechanism was just settling. Old building, old lift. I'd heard weirder noises working late before. I moved down to the 4th floor. Accounting. Same routine. Lights off, check the printer room, check the filing cabinets. I was halfway through when the elevator chimed again. Closer this time. I walked back toward the main corridor and looked at the display panel above the lift doors. It was sitting on the 4th floor. The doors were closed. I pressed the down button out of curiosity. The doors opened immediately. The car was empty, completely empty. Just that awful yellow lighting and the scratched metal walls. I stepped back and let the doors close. My gut was telling me something was off, but I talked myself down. Old building, old equipment. Maybe someone had pressed a button earlier, and it was just cycling through. Maybe the wiring was dodgy. I made a mental note to mention it to facilities in the morning. I took the stairs down to 3, my floor. I grabbed my jacket from my desk, shut down my computer properly, and did a quick sweep. The elevator chimed again while I was checking the server room. I stopped mid-step, listened. It had chimed on the 3rd floor. I was sure of it. I walked back out into the corridor. The elevator was sitting there. Doors closed. Display showing 3. I hadn't pressed the button. I hadn't been anywhere near it. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded strange in the empty building. No response. Just the hum of the lights and the faint whir of the HVAC system. I thought about calling someone. Maybe building security for the complex next door, or even the police non-emergency line. But what would I even say? The elevator's moving on its own? I'd sound ridiculous. I decided to just finish the job and get out. Second floor, HR and the reception area. I moved faster now, checking rooms more quickly, not bothering to be thorough. I just wanted to be done. I was locking the HR manager's office when I heard it again. The chime. I walked to the corridor and looked at the panel. The elevator was on the second floor. I stood there for a long moment, just staring at those closed doors. Every instinct told me to take the stairs, get to the ground floor, set the alarm, and leave. But part of me, maybe the stupid part, wanted to understand what was happening. I pressed the call button. The doors opened. Empty again. But this time I noticed something. The panel inside the car showed that someone had pressed the button for the 5th floor. The little light was still glowing. I didn't get in. I let the doors close and watched the display as the elevator rose. It stopped on 5. Chimed. Then, after a few seconds, it started coming back down. And it stopped on 4. Chimed. Then 3. Then 2. Someone was pressing the call button on every floor. Someone was in the building. "This isn't funny," I called out, louder this time. "Building's closed. You need to leave." Nothing. I pulled out my phone. No signal. The building's always been bad for reception. Thick walls. Something about the old wiring interfering. I'd need to get outside to call anyone. I took the stairs down to the ground floor, moving quickly but trying not to run. The stairwell was colder than the rest of the building, and my footsteps echoed. When I pushed through the door into the reception area, I half expected to see someone standing there, but it was empty. Just the reception desk, the visitor chairs, the potted ferns that were barely clinging to life. The elevator chimed behind me. I spun around, and it was on the ground floor now. The doors were closed. I walked over to the panel. The little down arrow was lit. Someone had called it to the ground floor. I looked around the reception area, checked behind the desk, checked the coat closet. Nothing. I should have left then. I should have just set the alarm from the external panel and gone home. But I didn't. I pressed the call button. The doors opened. Empty. But the smell hit me immediately. Cigarette smoke. Stale and recent. No one's allowed to smoke in the building. Hasn't been for years. I stepped back. The doors closed. The elevator started moving up. I watched the display. It stopped on 6. The top floor. The floor I'd locked up first. I stood there in the reception area, alone, trying to make sense of it. Someone was in the building. Someone had been following me, floor by floor, using the elevator while I took the stairs. But why? And how had I not seen them? I didn't wait to find out. I left through the front doors, pulled them shut, and set the alarm from the external keypad. My hands were shaking. I walked to my car in the adjacent car park, got in, locked the doors, and sat there for a minute, just breathing. I called the building manager from my mobile once I had signal. Told him I thought someone might have been in the building, that the elevator was acting strangely, that I'd smelled smoke. He said he'd check the CCTV in the morning and get back to me. He never did. When I asked him about it a few days later, he said the cameras on floors 4 through 6 had been offline for maintenance. No footage. He checked the alarm logs, only my code had been used to set it that night, and no sign of forced entry, no sign of anyone else. I still work in that building. I've stayed late a few times since then, though never alone. I take the stairs now. I don't use the elevator if I can help it. But sometimes, when I'm working late and the office is quiet, I hear it, that chime. And I wonder if someone's still there, pressing buttons, riding up and down, waiting for the night when I'm alone again. I still don't know who it was, or what they wanted, and I don't think I want to find out. I'd been visiting my dad in hospital. He'd had a fall, nothing too serious, but they wanted to keep him overnight for observation. I stayed until visiting hours ended at 10, then hung around the car park for a bit answering work emails. By the time I actually started driving, it was midnight. The hospital's about an hour and a half from where I live, mostly dual carriageway until you get to the last 20 miles or so, which is all back roads through farmland. I work in admin for a logistics company, so I'm used to long drives for site visits, but I don't usually do them this late. The roads were empty, properly empty. I think I saw maybe 3 other cars on the dual carriageway the whole way. I turned off onto the B road just after 2 in the morning, but my phone was at about 30% battery, and I'd forgotten to bring my car charger. I remember thinking I should have charged it at the hospital, but I'd been distracted. The sat-nav was running, eating through what was left. The road was narrow, high hedges on both sides, no streetlights, just my headlights and the white lines. I had the radio on low, some talk station I wasn't really listening to. I was tired, but not dangerously so. I'd done this drive dozens of times. That's when I first noticed the headlights behind me. They appeared maybe 5 minutes after I turned onto the B road, just a pair of lights in my rearview mirror, distant but steady. I didn't think much of it at first. Someone else heading home late. Same as me. The road's the main route through to 3 or 4 villages, so it made sense, but they stayed there. On exactly the same distance behind me, I sped up a little going down a straight stretch. Not much, maybe 5 miles an hour over the limit, and they sped up too. When I slowed down for a sharp bend, they slowed down. Always the same gap. Maybe a mile, maybe a bit less. Far enough that I couldn't make out the type of car, just the lights. I told myself I was being paranoid. It was a single road with no turnings for miles. Of course they were behind me. Where else would they be? I kept driving. The hedges gave way to open fields for a bit, then back to hedges. A few farms set back from the road, all dark. No other cars, no signs of life. Just me and the headlights. After about 15 minutes, I started feeling uneasy. My gut was telling me something was off, but I couldn't put my finger on what. They were just driving, that's all. Driving the same road I was driving. There's a little pull-in about halfway along, next to a field gate. I've stopped there before to take calls or check directions. I thought maybe if I pulled in, they'd just drive past and I could stop feeling like this. So I indicated, stupid really, no one else was around, and pulled into the lay-by. I left the engine running and watched my rear-view mirror. The headlights slowed down. For a second I thought they were going to pull in behind me, and my heart absolutely kicked in my chest. But they didn't. They crawled past, maybe 10 miles an hour, and I caught a glimpse of a dark-colored saloon car. Couldn't see the driver. The windows looked tinted, or maybe it was just the darkness. The car rolled past and continued down the road. I sat there for a minute feeling stupid. See? Nothing. On just someone driving carefully on a narrow road at night, I was overtired and jumpy, Because of the hospital and the late hour, I pulled back onto the road and kept going. 5 minutes later, the headlights were behind me again. Same distance. Same steady pace. Like they'd been waiting somewhere up ahead and slipped back into position. That's when the fear really started. Proper fear, not just unease, because there was nowhere they could have turned around. The road didn't have any turnings, just field gates and farm tracks. And I would have seen them. I would have seen headlights swinging across the road. I sped up. Not recklessly, but faster than I should have on that road. The bends were tight and the hedges were high, and I didn't know what I'd do if a tractor or something came the other way. The headlights sped up too, still the same distance back. My phone was down to 18%. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even say? Someone's driving behind me on a public road? They hadn't done anything. They hadn't tried to overtake or run me off or anything. They were just there. I kept telling myself that. They're just driving. You're overreacting. But my hands were shaking on the wheel. There's a village about 10 miles from my house, the last one before the final stretch of empty road. It's tiny, maybe 50 houses, but there's a 24-hour petrol station on the edge of it. I decided I'd pull in there. Public place, cameras, lights. I'd fill up even though I didn't need to, and they'd drive on. The petrol station appeared around a bend, lit up like a little island. I indicated again, still stupid, and still no one else around, and pulled onto the forecourt. I parked by a pump and turned the engine off. My heart was hammering. I watched the road. The headlights slowed as they reached the station. For a horrible moment, I thought they were going to turn in. But they didn't. They crawled past, same speed as before, and disappeared up the road toward my village. I sat there for a long time. 10 minutes, maybe 15. The station attendant was visible through the window, restocking shelves. I thought about going in, telling him, what? That I was scared of a car? My phone was at 11%. I should have charged it. I should have called someone earlier when I first felt wrong about it. But it was past 3 in the morning now, and I didn't want to wake anyone over nothing. Yes, eventually I started the engine and pulled back onto the road. The last 10 miles were the worst I've ever driven. The road was even narrower. Tree branches meeting overhead in places, no lights anywhere. I kept checking the rear view mirror. Nothing, just darkness. I started to relax a little. They'd gone. Probably lived in the village or turned off somewhere I hadn't noticed. I'd worked myself up over nothing. Then I came around the final bend before my house and saw them. Parked on the verge, about 200 meters from my driveway. Headlights off, just sitting there. I didn't stop. I accelerated past them, pulled into my drive, jabbed the button for the garage door, and drove straight in. I hit the button again before I'd even turned the engine off and watched the door roll down. And my hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key out of the ignition. I sat in the dark garage for a long time, listening. I didn't hear anything. No car pulling up, no footsteps, nothing. Eventually, I went inside and locked every door. I didn't look out the windows. I didn't want to see if they were still there. In the morning, the road was empty. No car on the verge. I checked the dash cam footage, but it was too dark and too far away to make out a license plate or any details. I still don't know who it was or what they wanted. Maybe they were just driving the same route, and I made it into something it wasn't. Maybe I was tired and paranoid and saw patterns that weren't there. But I don't drive that road at night anymore. And I still think about those headlights, staying exactly the same distance behind me, for 40 minutes straight. Every instinct I had was screaming at me that something was wrong. I just wish I'd listened sooner. The waiting room chairs were bolted together in rows of 5. Hard plastic, dark blue, the kind that squeaked every time you shifted your weight. I'd been sitting in the same spot for nearly 4 hours by the time I noticed him. My mom had been admitted that afternoon. Nothing life-threatening, they said. Gallstones needed to keep her overnight for observation before a procedure in the morning. I'd driven straight from work, still in my supermarket uniform, name badge and everything. The plan was to stay until she fell asleep, then head home. But the ward was understaffed, and visiting hours kept getting extended in 15-minute increments. By the time a nurse finally told me I had to leave, it was past 11, and the last bus had already gone. I could have called a taxi, but I was trying to save money. A rent was due in 3 days, and I was already cutting it close. So I decided to wait it out in the main lobby until the first bus at 5:30. Stupid, maybe. But the hospital was warm, well lit, and there were security guards doing rounds. Seemed safer than walking home through the estate at that hour. The lobby was mostly empty. A few people scattered around, someone asleep across 3 chairs near the vending machines, an older woman knitting by the entrance, a man in a high-vis jacket staring at his phone. I picked a spot near the back corner close to the toilets, but with a clear view of the doors. I had my phone, my coat bundled up as a pillow, and a half-dead battery. I figured I'd doze a bit, check the time every so often, and be fine. I didn't notice him at first. I saw him, he was there when I sat down, maybe 4 or 5 rows ahead of me facing the same direction. Dark jacket, hood up, hands in his pockets. I didn't think much of it. Plenty of people end up stuck in hospitals overnight. I tried to sleep, but couldn't really manage it. Every time I closed my eyes for more than a few minutes, someone would cough or a door would slam or the PA system would crackle to life. Around midnight, I got up to use the toilet. When I came back, I noticed he'd moved. Not far, just 1 row closer, still facing forward. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe his original seat was uncomfortable. Maybe he wanted to be closer to the radiator. People move around. It's normal. But my gut was telling me something was off. I sat back down and pulled out my phone. 2% battery left. I turned it off to save it for an emergency. The man didn't move, and he just sat there, completely still, hands still in his pockets. I couldn't see his face because of the hood, but I had this creeping feeling he was looking at me. I stared at the back of his head for a while, waiting for him to turn or shift or do anything. He didn't. I tried to distract myself. I counted the ceiling tiles. I read the fire safety poster on the wall 3 times. I watched the security guard walk past on his rounds, nodding at me as he went. I thought about saying something to him. Hey, there's a guy acting weird. But what would I even say? He's just sitting there. That's not a crime. Around 1 a.m, I got up again. Not because I needed the toilet, but because I wanted to see if he'd move again. I walked to the vending machine, bought a bottle of water I didn't want with the last of my change, and took my time walking back. When I returned to my seat, he'd moved again. 2 rows closer this time. Still facing forward. Still completely still. Now I was sure. This wasn't coincidence. I sat down slowly, keeping my eyes on him. My heart was pounding. I thought about moving to a different part of the lobby, but that felt like admitting I was scared. And maybe I was overreacting. Maybe he was just, restless. Some people fidget by moving seats. It's weird but not threatening. Except every instinct I had was screaming at me to get out. I stayed put. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't want to seem paranoid. Maybe I thought if I moved, he'd follow, and that would be worse. So I sat there, staring at the back of his hood, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. 20 minutes later, he moved again. At this time, he didn't wait for me to get up. He just stood, walked one row closer, and sat back down, slow and deliberate, like he wanted me to see. I stood up. I didn't plan to. My body just did it. I walked toward the entrance where the older woman had been knitting, but she was gone now. The person sleeping by the vending machines was gone too. It was just me, the man in the hood, and the hum of the fluorescent lights. I should have found the security guard. I should have walked straight to the front desk and asked them to call someone. But I didn't. I told myself I'd look stupid, that I'd cause a scene over nothing, that he probably hadn't even noticed me. I sat down near the entrance instead, as far from him as I could get. I kept my coat on, my arms crossed, my eyes on the doors. I thought about leaving, walking home, but the idea of being outside in the dark felt worse than staying. He didn't move for a while, maybe 10 minutes. Then he stood up again. This time he walked all the way across the lobby and sat down in the row directly behind me. I could hear him breathing. I didn't turn around. I didn't move. I just sat there, frozen, listening to the sound of his breath, slow and even, like he was completely calm. The hair on the back of my neck was standing up. My hands were shaking. I thought about running. I thought about screaming. I thought about turning around and asking him what the hell he wanted, but I didn't do any of those things. I just sat there, staring at the doors, waiting for the security guard to come back. He never did. After what felt like hours but was probably only 5 minutes, I heard the man stand up. I didn't turn around, and I heard his footsteps, slow, deliberate, walking toward the exit. I heard the automatic doors slide open, then close. I waited another 10 minutes before I turned around. He was gone. I didn't sleep after that. I sat there until the first bus came at 5:30, then got on and went straight home. I never saw him again. I never found out who he was or what he wanted. Maybe he was just messing with me. Maybe he got off on scaring people. I don't know. But I still think about it. About the way he moved, row by row, getting closer every time. About the way he sat so still, like he was waiting for something. About the fact that I didn't do anything, didn't call for help, didn't leave, didn't even turn around to look at him. To this day, I don't know what would have happened if I had. The towpath was faster than taking the main road. I'd worked out it saved me about 15 minutes on the walk home from my shift at the warehouse. I did inventory management, which sounds more important than it is. Mostly I just counted boxes and updated spreadsheets until midnight or later when we had big shipments coming in. That night I'd stayed until nearly 1 because a delivery truck had shown up 3 hours late and my supervisor needed someone to log everything before the morning crew arrived. I'd been taking the canal route for about 2 months. It ran parallel to the main road but cut through the industrial estate and some older residential areas. During the day, it was fine. Joggers, dog walkers, the occasional cyclist. At night it was empty, but I'd never had any problems. The path was paved and lit every 50 meters or so by those old yellow street lights that hummed and flickered. The canal itself was just black water, maybe 6 meters across, with the occasional shopping trolley or traffic cone sticking out near the edges. I was about 10 minutes into the walk when I passed under the first bridge. It was a road bridge, wide enough for 2 lanes of traffic, though at that hour nothing was moving. The underside was concrete, stained with water damage and covered in graffiti. I didn't think much of it. I had my earbuds in, listening to a podcast about true crime, which in hindsight feels a bit ironic. When I came out the other side, I glanced up at the bridge out of habit. There was someone standing on it, just standing there, right in the middle, looking down at the canal. Yet I could see their silhouette against the orange glow of the streetlights on the road above. They were wearing what looked like a dark jacket or hoodie. I couldn't make out any features. I figured they were just out for a smoke or waiting for someone. People do weird things at night. I kept walking. The second bridge was maybe 400 meters further along. This one was smaller, just a footbridge connecting 2 residential streets. The path underneath was narrower, and one of the lights was out, so it was darker than usual. I walked through quickly, my footsteps echoing off the damp concrete. When I emerged, I looked up again. There was someone on this bridge too. Same position, standing in the middle, looking down. Same dark clothing. I stopped walking for a second. My gut told me something was off, but I tried to rationalize it. Well, maybe it was a different person. Maybe there were just a lot of people out tonight who liked standing on bridges at 1 a.m. It sounded stupid even as I thought it, but I didn't want to be paranoid. I took out my earbuds and kept going. The canal was silent except for the hum of the streetlights and the occasional drip of water from somewhere. The path stretched ahead, lit in pools of yellow with long stretches of shadow in between. The third bridge was another road bridge, bigger than the first. I could see it up ahead, maybe 300 meters away. I was walking faster now, not quite jogging, but definitely not casual. I kept telling myself I was overreacting. It was probably just a coincidence. But every instinct I had was telling me to turn around, to take the main road, even if it added 15 minutes. I didn't turn around. Well, I don't know why. Maybe I didn't want to feel stupid. Maybe I thought I was being irrational. I just kept walking. When I got close to the third bridge, I slowed down. I didn't want to look up, but I had to. I had to know they were there. Same position. Same dark shape against the light. Standing completely still, looking down at the water, or at me. I couldn't tell. I stopped walking. My heart was hammering in my chest. I pulled out my phone to check if I had signal. 2 bars. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even say? There's someone standing on a bridge? That's not illegal. They hadn't done anything. They hadn't even moved. I'd sound insane. I put my phone away and kept walking. I told myself that once I passed under this bridge, I'd see that it was a different person, or that they'd be gone, or that there'd be some obvious explanation. I walked under the bridge quickly, my footsteps loud in the enclosed space. When I came out, I didn't look up right away. I walked about 10 meters, then stopped and turned around. They were still there, still in the exact same position, still looking down. I started walking faster. The fourth bridge was coming up, a narrow railway bridge that carried a freight line. Trains only used it a few times a day, mostly in the early morning. The path underneath was tight, just wide enough for 2 people to pass each other. I could see the bridge ahead. I could see someone standing on it. I stopped walking again. My hands were shaking. I thought about turning back, but that would mean walking under all 3 bridges again, passing directly beneath them. I thought about climbing up to the road. But the sides of the canal were steep and lined with metal railings. I thought about calling someone, my flatmate, my sister, anyone. But it was past 1 in the morning and I didn't know what I'd say. I kept walking. I don't know why. I just did. As I got closer to the railway bridge, I I could see the figure more clearly. They were wearing a dark coat, hands at their sides, completely motionless. The way they stood was wrong somehow. Too still, too deliberate. I walked under the bridge. It was darker here. The street lights not quite reaching. I could hear my own breathing, too loud in the confined space. When I came out the other side, I didn't stop. I didn't look up. I just kept walking, faster now, almost running. There was one more bridge ahead, a footbridge, the last one before the path opened up near the main road. I could see it in the distance, maybe 200 meters away. I could see the figure standing on it. I started running. I don't care how stupid it looked. I ran past the fifth bridge without looking up, my bag bouncing against my side, my breath coming in short gasps. When I reached the end of the towpath, I scrambled up the steps to the main road and didn't stop until I was under the lights of a 24-hour petrol station. I stood there for 10 minutes, catching my breath, checking over my shoulder. No one came. No one followed me. The main road was empty, except for the occasional car passing by. I walked the rest of the way home on the main road. It took an extra 20 minutes. I didn't care. I never took the canal path again. I switched my route permanently, even though it's longer and means I get home later. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that I'd imagined the connection, that it was just random people out at night. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was the same person, that they'd somehow moved from bridge to bridge, staying ahead of me, waiting. I still don't know who they were or what they wanted. I don't know if they were trying to scare me or if it was something worse. I think about it sometimes, late at night when I'm walking home. I think about what would have happened if I'd stopped under one of those bridges, if I'd looked up and they'd looked back. I'm glad I kept walking. I'm glad I ran. But I still don't have any answers, and I don't think I ever will. The warehouse was about 15 miles outside town, tucked between a derelict industrial estate and a stretch of empty fields. I'd been working there for maybe 6 months, doing inventory counts for a medical supply distributor. Not exciting work, but it was steady, and the overnight shift paid an extra £2 an hour. Most nights I was the only one there from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., just me and about 40,000 square feet of shelving. That Tuesday started normal enough. I clocked in at 10, made myself a cup of instant coffee in the break room, and grabbed my clipboard from the office. The building was one of those prefab metal structures with fluorescent strips running the length of the ceiling, half of them flickering because maintenance never got around to replacing the ballasts. But the heating was temperamental too. Some sections were stuffy and others were freezing. You learned to dress in layers. I usually started in Section C, working my way through the pharmaceutical supplies, boxes of syringes, IV bags, bandages, that sort of thing. The routine was simple. Scan the barcode, check the quantity against the system, note any discrepancies on the clipboard. It took about 4 hours to do a full count of one section, and I'd rotate through the warehouse over the course of the week. Around midnight, I went back to the break room for another coffee. The clipboard was where I'd left it on the metal table. When I picked it up to review my progress, there was a handwritten note clipped to the top page. Just a small piece of lined paper, the kind you'd tear from a notebook. And it said, "You missed box 4C117. I stared at it for a moment. The handwriting was neat, almost childlike, written in blue ballpoint pen. I figured maybe the day shift supervisor had left it. Sometimes they'd leave notes if there was a problem with a previous count. But I definitely scanned 4C117. I remembered it specifically because the box had been partially open and I'd had to retape it. I went back to Section C and checked anyway. Box 4, C1, 17 was right where it should be. Properly sealed, barcode scanned. I shrugged it off. Maybe the note was old, left over from a previous shift. I threw it in the recycling bin near the loading dock and got back to work. An hour later, I took another break. I was tired. I'd been up since 7 the previous morning because I'd had to sort out some stuff with my landlord before my shift. When I sat down in the break room, I nearly didn't notice it. Another note, same handwriting, clipped to my clipboard. Check the back corner of Section F. My gut tightened a little. Section F was clear on the other side of the warehouse, and I hadn't even started inventory there yet. I looked around the break room. The door to the loading dock was shut. The office door was shut too. The CCTV camera in the corner had a little red light blinking. Same as always, I told myself it had to be someone from the day shift playing a prank. Maybe they'd left a bunch of notes and I was only just finding them. It didn't make sense, but I couldn't think of another explanation. I walked over to Section F anyway, just to check. The back corner was stacked with bulk orders of surgical gloves, towers of boxes reaching almost to the ceiling. Everything looked fine, nothing out of place. I went back to the office and pulled up the security log on the computer. The system tracked everyone who clocked in and out. According to the log, I was the only person in the building. The last person before me had clocked out at 9:47 p.m. I sat there for a while, staring at the screen. Every instinct told me something was off, but I couldn't figure out what. The doors were all locked from the inside. I'd checked them myself when I arrived, same as every night. The loading dock had a rolling shutter that required a key fob to open, and I had the only fob on site during the overnight shift. I almost called the police right then. I had my phone in my hand, the number half dialed. But what was I going to say? Someone left me a note? They'd think I was wasting their time. When I put the phone back in my pocket and told myself I was being paranoid, I went back to Section C and tried to focus on the inventory. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and somewhere in the building the heating system clanked and groaned. I kept glancing over my shoulder, but there was nothing. Just rows and rows of metal shelving disappearing into the distance. Around 3 in the morning, I went back to the break room. I was exhausted by then, running on bad coffee and nervous energy. The clipboard was on the table where I'd left it. There was another note. This one said, "You should check the freezer." The freezer was a walk-in unit at the back of the warehouse used for temperature-sensitive inventory. I hadn't been in there all night. My hands were shaking a little as I walked toward it. The door was heavy, insulated, with a big silver handle. I pulled it open, and cold air rushed out, fogging up my glasses. Inside, everything was normal. Boxes of vaccines and insulin neatly stacked on wire racks. The temperature gauge on the wall read -4 degrees Celsius. I stood there for a moment, my breath coming out in clouds, and then I saw it. Another note, taped to the inside of the door. Same handwriting. "I know you're alone." I backed out of the freezer so fast I nearly tripped over my own feet. The door swung shut behind me with a heavy thunk. My heart was hammering in my chest, and I couldn't think straight. Someone was in the building. They had to be, but the doors were locked. The security log said I was alone. None of it made sense. I grabbed my phone and called my supervisor. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I tried again. Voicemail. But I thought about calling the police, but The same doubt crept in. What if I was overreacting? What if there was some explanation I wasn't seeing? I decided to leave. I didn't care about finishing the shift or what my supervisor would say. I just wanted out. I grabbed my coat from the break room and headed for the front entrance. That's when I saw him. He was standing in the middle of the main aisle, about 50 feet away, just standing there under one of the flickering lights. He was wearing a dark jacket and jeans, hands in his pockets, completely still. I couldn't see his face clearly from that distance, but I could tell he was looking right at me. I froze. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. Then he took a step forward, slow and deliberate, and I bolted for the door. I fumbled with the lock, with my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the deadbolt. I finally got it open and ran to my car, not looking back. I sat in the driver's seat with the doors locked, engine running, staring at the warehouse entrance. He never came out. After about 10 minutes, I called the police. They arrived 20 minutes later and searched the building. They didn't find anyone. No signs of forced entry, no fingerprints on the notes, nothing on the CCTV footage, except me walking around by myself. The supervisor reviewed the tapes the next day and said the same thing. Just me, alone, for the entire shift. The notes were real, I still had them in my pocket, but there was no explanation for how they got there. I quit the next week. I told them it was for personal reasons, didn't mention the notes or the man I saw. And I still don't know who he was or how he got in. Sometimes I think about those notes, the way the handwriting was so neat and careful, like someone had taken their time, like they wanted me to know they were there. I drive past that warehouse sometimes on my way to my new job. The lights are always on at night, and I wonder if whoever's working the overnight shift now has found any notes on their clipboard. I hope not, but I don't really believe that. The job posting said overnight inventory assistant, which sounded better than it was. Basically, I walked around a massive self-storage building with a tablet, scanning unit numbers and checking them against a database. The company had just been bought out by some bigger chain, and they needed everything verified before the system migration. It paid £17 an hour, and the shift was 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., Wednesday through Saturday. I'd been doing it for about 5 weeks. The facility was out near the industrial park, one of those big modern places, 5 floors, climate-controlled, the works. During the day it was busy enough, people coming and going with their boxes and furniture. But at night it was just me and Derek, the security guard who sat in the office by the front entrance. He was maybe 60. He spent most of his shift watching football highlights on his phone. We'd exchange maybe 10 words a night. He'd buzz me in, I'd do my rounds, I'd leave. That was it. That Wednesday I started on the 5th floor, like always. The building had this weird smell at night, like cardboard and dust, and that specific scent of old furniture. The fluorescent lights were motion activated, so they'd flick on as I walked down each corridor, and then shut off behind me a minute or so later. It made the place feel like it was breathing. I'd gotten used to it. I was maybe an hour into my shift, working my way through the 5C corridor, when I heard it. A metallic rattle, then a rolling sound, like one of those big sliding doors being pulled up. It came from below me, maybe 2 or 3 floors down. I stopped scanning and listened. The sound stopped. Then, maybe 30 seconds later, the same noise in reverse, the door rolling back down, the rattle of the lock. I figured it was Derek doing a walkthrough, or maybe maintenance. The company did sometimes send contractors in overnight to fix broken locks or replace light panels. I went back to scanning. 20 minutes later, it happened again. Same sound. Rolling door going up, pause. Rolling door coming down. This time I checked my phone. It was 12:47 a.m. I pulled up the staff group chat to see if Derek had mentioned anything about contractors tonight. Nothing. The last message was from Monday. Someone asking about shift swaps. My gut told me to go downstairs and check, but I talked myself out of it. It wasn't my job to investigate noises. That was Derek's thing, and honestly, I didn't want to walk down 3 flights of stairs just to find out it was nothing. I kept working. By 1:15, I'd finished the 5th floor and moved down to the 4th. The layout was identical on every floor. Long corridors branching off a central elevator and stairwell, units on both sides, everything labeled with floor number and letter code. 4A, 4B, 4C, 4D. I started with 4A. The sound came again. Louder this time because I was closer. Definitely 2 floors below. I stopped in the middle of the corridor and just listened. Rolling door up. Long pause, maybe a full minute. Rolling door down. Then silence. I should have called Derek right then. I had his number. But I didn't want to seem jumpy or paranoid. I'd only been working there 5 weeks. I didn't want to be the person who freaked out over nothing. So I kept telling myself it was maintenance, or maybe the building settling, or some automated system I didn't know about. I moved through 4B, scanning units, trying to focus on the tablet. But I kept listening. 15 minutes passed. Then the sound again. Same floor, same rhythm. Door up, pause, door down. This time I opened the group chat and typed out a message to Derek. You doing a walkthrough tonight? Hearing some noises on 2nd floor, I think? I stared at it for a second, then deleted it. It sounded stupid. I pocketed my phone and kept working. By 2 a.m., I was halfway through the 4th floor. The sound had happened 4 more times, always the same. Always the same interval, roughly 15 to 20 minutes. Always the same floor. I was sure now it was the 2nd floor. And I was sure it was the same unit, because the echo had that same metallic quality every time, like it was coming from the exact same spot. I thought about going down there. I thought about it seriously. But the idea of walking down those stairs, into those dark corridors, with the lights clicking on as I moved, just to confront some stranger in the middle of the night, I couldn't do it. Every instinct told me to stay where I was. At 2:30, I moved down to the 3rd floor. Now I was 1 floor above it. The sound was so loud I could hear the scrape of the metal track, the slight bounce of the door as it locked into place. I stood at the top of the stairwell, looking down. The lights below were off, motion activated. If someone was down there, they weren't moving between units. They were staying in one place. I pulled out my phone and called Derek. It rang 4 times. I then went to voicemail. I tried again. Same thing. That sinking feeling in my stomach got worse. Derek always answered. He had nothing else to do. I sent him a text. Can you come up to 3rd floor? Want to check something? No reply. I waited 5 minutes, staring at my phone. Nothing. I thought about leaving, just walking out, getting in my car, going home. But I needed this job, and if I left without finishing my shift, I'd have to explain why. And what was I going to say? I heard a noise and got scared. The sound came again. Door up. Pause. Door down. I made myself walk to the stairwell and look down. The lights were still off on the 2nd floor. I couldn't see anything. I stood there for maybe 2 minutes, just listening. Silence. Then faintly, I heard something else. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, and moving down the corridor below me. I backed away from the stairwell and moved toward the elevator. I pressed the button. Nothing. I pressed it again. The display was dead. I checked my phone. No signal. I'd had 2 bars a minute ago. That's when I decided to leave. I didn't care about the job anymore. I walked quickly toward the main stairwell at the far end of the building, the one that led straight down to the ground floor lobby. My footsteps echoed. The lights flickered on ahead of me and off behind me. I didn't look back. I got to the stairwell and started down. At the second floor landing, I stopped. The door to the corridor was propped open with a doorstop. It was never propped open. I could see down the hallway. The lights were on. And at the far end, maybe 50 meters away, one of the unit doors was open. Just standing open. I couldn't see inside. I didn't go any closer. I kept going down the stairs, moving faster now. When I got to the ground floor, I pushed through the door into the lobby. Derek wasn't at the desk. His phone was there, face down. His jacket was still on the back of his chair. The front door was locked from the inside. I unlocked it, walked out to my car, and drove home. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I texted my supervisor the next morning and said I was quitting. Family emergency. She didn't ask questions. I never went back. I never found out what was on the second floor that night, or why Derek didn't answer, or who kept opening and closing that unit. I still think about it sometimes. I tell myself it was probably nothing, but I don't believe that. The smell hit me first. Diesel fumes, thick and acrid, seeping up through the stairwell. I'd been doing security for about 8 months. Mostly I got shopping centers or construction sites. But this was different. The building had been empty for 2 years. Some tech company that went bust during the pandemic. The developer owned it now, planning to convert it into flats. But until the planning permission came through, they needed someone to check it twice a week. Make sure squatters hadn't moved in, that sort of thing. It was supposed to be simple. Tuesday and Friday nights, 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. Walk every floor. Check the fire doors. Take photos of anything that looked off. The building was 6 stories, mostly gutted inside. They'd stripped out the cubicles and most of the fixtures, so it was just concrete floors and support columns. Yet the windows were still intact but filthy, and the emergency lighting was the only thing that worked. It gave everything this greenish tint that made my eyes hurt after a while. I'd done 3 shifts already without incident. Boring, honestly. I'd bring a thermos of tea and my phone, walk the floors, then sit in the ground floor lobby for the last hour scrolling through Reddit. That Friday I arrived just before 10. Parked my car in the loading bay out back like always. The building sat on the edge of an industrial estate surrounded by other empty units and a big Tesco distribution center about half a mile down the road. At night it was completely dead. No foot traffic, barely any cars on the main road. I let myself in through the side entrance with the key code they'd given me. The ground floor was the largest, an open plan space that used to be the main office area. Now it was just concrete and dust. I did my usual routine, started at the top and worked my way down. 6th floor, 5th, 4th, all clear. Nothing but empty rooms and the hum of the emergency lights. I was on the 3rd floor when I heard it. An engine. Faint, but definitely running. I stopped walking and listened. It was coming from below, from the ground floor. The building had an underground car park, but it had been sealed off months ago. Flooding issue, apparently. So the sound had to be coming from outside. I figured someone had pulled into the loading bay, maybe a delivery driver taking a break, or someone turning around. I kept walking, finished the third floor, moved to the second. The engine was still going. I checked my watch. 20 minutes now. Like my gut was telling me something was off, but I talked myself down. It's a public road, I thought. People can park wherever they want. Maybe their car had broken down and they were waiting for a tow. I finished the second floor and headed down to the first. The engine noise was louder now, echoing slightly. And that's when the smell hit me properly. Diesel fumes, way too strong for something outside. I walked to the front of the building and looked out through the grimy windows. Nothing. No car in the front lot. I went back to the stairwell, and that's when I realized. The smell was coming from inside the building. The ground floor had a small parking bay just off the main lobby. It was meant for executives or whatever, direct access to the building. 3 spaces marked with faded white lines, and I'd checked it on every shift, and it had always been empty. The roller door that led outside was padlocked shut. But now, standing at the top of the stairs, I could hear the engine clearly, and I could see the faint glow of headlights reflecting off the concrete wall. Someone had driven a car into the building. I should have called the police right then. I had my phone in my pocket. I had the security company's emergency number saved, but I didn't. I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe the developer had sent someone to check something and forgot to tell me. Maybe it was another security guard from a different company. I didn't want to look like an idiot calling 999 over a parked car. I walked down the stairs slowly. The fumes were worse now, making my eyes water. The headlights were on full beam, pointing at the wall. And I couldn't see the car itself yet, just the light spilling across the floor. I reached the bottom of the stairs and stepped into the lobby. The car was a dark blue saloon, maybe a Mondeo or a Passat. It was parked in the middle bay, engine running, headlights on. The driver's door was open. No one inside. I stood there for a long moment, just staring. The engine idled smoothly. The radio wasn't on. The interior light was off. I couldn't see a phone or a bag or anything on the seats. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded small in the empty space. Nothing. I walked closer, slowly. Every instinct told me to turn around and leave, but I didn't. I leaned down and looked inside the car. The keys were in the ignition. The fuel gauge showed half a tank. There was a Tesco receipt on the passenger seat dated that morning, and I stepped back and looked around the lobby. The fire doors were closed. The stairwell was empty. The front entrance was still locked from the inside. Whoever had driven this car in here was still in the building. That's when I should have left. I know that now. But I'd already walked every floor. I'd checked every room. There was nowhere to hide except the stairwells, and I'd been using those the whole time. I pulled out my phone and checked the time. 11:34 p.m. I'd been in the building for an hour and a half. The car hadn't been there when I arrived, which meant someone had driven it in while I was upstairs. But the roller door was still padlocked. I could see it from where I stood. The heavy chain looped through the handle. I walked over and checked it. Locked. No signs of tampering. Yet the padlock was the same one I'd photographed on Tuesday. I turned back to the car. The engine was still running. The headlights were still on. I called out again. "This is private property. If you're in here, you need to leave." Silence. I stood there for maybe 2 minutes, just listening. The building was completely still except for the engine. No footsteps. No doors opening or closing. Nothing. I walked back to the stairwell and climbed to the first floor. I checked every room again, moving quickly now. Empty. I went to the second floor. Empty. Third, fourth, fifth, sixth. All empty. When I came back down, the car was gone. Not turned off. Not moved. Gone. The parking bay was empty. No tire marks in the dust. No smell of fumes. I stood there staring at the empty space, my heart hammering in my chest. And I walked to the roller door. Still locked. Still chained. I checked my phone. 12:03 a.m. I'd been upstairs for less than 30 minutes. I left. I didn't finish the shift. I didn't take photos. I just walked out the side door, got in my car, and drove home. I called the security company the next morning and told them I was sick. Couldn't do the Friday shift anymore. They were fine with it. They didn't ask questions. I never went back to that building. I don't know if anyone else has seen the car. I don't know how it got in or where it went. I've thought about it a lot over the past few months. I've tried to come up with rational explanations. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe the fumes made me hallucinate. Maybe I was more tired than I thought. But I know what I saw, and I know what I didn't see. I didn't see anyone drive that car out. And I didn't hear the roller door open. I didn't see tire marks or footprints or any sign that someone had been there. To this day, I still don't know what I walked away from that night. The museum stayed open until 9 on Thursdays. I'd been working there as a gallery attendant for about a year, mostly weekday afternoons. But they needed someone to cover the late shift, and I could use the extra hours. My flatmate had just moved out, and I was scrambling to cover rent on my own. It was a small local museum, 3 floors, mostly local history, and some rotating art exhibits. Nothing famous. We'd get maybe 20 visitors on a good Thursday evening. School groups during the day, pensioners in the afternoon, but nights were dead. The late opening was some council initiative to seem cultured. Hardly anyone came. My job was simple. Walk the galleries every 30 minutes, make sure no one was touching anything, answer questions if anyone had them, lock up at 9. There was supposed to be 2 of us on shift. But Marcus had called in sick that morning, and they couldn't find cover. My supervisor said it'd be fine. Just do the rounds, keep my phone on me. I got there at 5. The day staff left at 6. After that, it was just me and whoever wandered in. The building was old, Victorian, all creaking floorboards and high ceilings. The heating never worked properly, so it was always too cold in winter, too hot in summer. That night it was February, freezing outside, but inside it was stuffy and dry. The radiators clanked and hissed. First hour was quiet. I sat at the front desk, scrolled through my phone, checked the time every 10 minutes. At 6:30 I did my first round. Ground floor, local archaeology, Bronze Age pottery, some Roman coins. First floor, Victorian domestic life, recreated parlor, kitchen, bedroom. And second floor, temporary exhibit, watercolors by some local artist I'd never heard of. All empty. I went back downstairs. Around 7, a few people came in. An older couple who spent maybe 15 minutes looking at the pottery, then left. A woman in her 30s with a notebook, probably an art student, went straight upstairs to the watercolors. She stayed up there for a while. I did another round at 7:30. She was still there, sketching. I nodded at her. She smiled. I kept walking. Then, just before 8, a man came in. He was maybe mid-40s, average height, wearing a dark coat and jeans. Clean-shaven, short hair. Nothing remarkable about him. He didn't make eye contact when he came through the door. Didn't ask any questions. Just walked past the desk and headed upstairs. I didn't think much of it. But we got solo visitors all the time. I went back to my phone. At 8, I did my next round. The art student was gone, must have left while I was in the back office getting my coat. I went upstairs. The man was standing in the second-floor gallery, the one with the watercolors. He was in the far corner, hands in his pockets, staring at a painting of a harbor. I walked past, checked the rest of the room, came back downstairs. 8:30, another round. He was still there. Same spot, same painting. He hadn't moved. I slowed down as I walked past, glanced at him. He didn't look at me, just stood there, perfectly still. My gut told me something was off, but I talked myself down. Maybe he really liked that painting. Maybe he was killing time before meeting someone. People did that. I went back downstairs, 9 o'clock, closing time. I went upstairs to tell him we were locking up. He wasn't in the watercolor gallery. I checked the Victorian rooms, not there either. I went back downstairs, checked the ground floor. Empty. I figured he'd left while I was in the office. I hadn't heard the door, but the wind was loud outside, and I'd had my headphones in for a minute while I was updating the visitor log. I locked the front door, turned off the lights in the lobby, started my final check. Ground floor, clear. First floor, I walked through the parlor, the kitchen, the bedroom, all empty. Second floor, I stepped into the watercolor gallery and stopped. He was there. Same corner, same painting. Hands in his pockets. Hadn't moved. My heart kicked. I cleared my throat. "Excuse me, we're closed now." He didn't turn around. "Sir, we're locking up." Nothing. Yet he just stood there, staring at the painting. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I thought about calling my supervisor, but what would I say? There's a guy standing in a gallery. He hadn't done anything. Maybe he had headphones in. Maybe he was just zoned out. I stepped closer. "Sir, I need you to leave now." He turned his head, slowly, looked right at me. His face was blank, not angry, not confused. Just nothing. He didn't say anything. He turned back to the painting. I should have called the police right then. I know that now. But I didn't. I told myself I was overreacting. I told myself he'd leave if I just waited. I stepped back, went downstairs, stood by the front desk. I kept my phone in my hand. I waited 5 minutes. Then I went back up. He was gone. I checked every room on the second floor. Nothing. And I checked the first floor. Nothing. I went back downstairs. The front door was still locked. I hadn't heard it open. The back exit was alarmed. If he'd gone out that way, it would have gone off. I checked the toilets. Empty. I checked the storage room. Locked. I checked the office. Nothing. He was just gone. I stood in the lobby, breathing hard, trying to make sense of it. Maybe there was a door I'd missed. Maybe he'd slipped past me somehow. But I'd been standing right by the stairs. I would have seen him. I did one more round, faster this time, checking every corner. Ground floor, first floor, second floor, all clear. I locked up, set the alarm, left. I sat in my car for 10 minutes before I started the engine. My hands were shaking. I kept looking at the museum doors, half expecting to see him standing there watching me. And I told my supervisor the next day. She said maybe he'd left while I was in the office, and I just didn't notice. She said the building was old, the acoustics were weird, sounds didn't carry. She said I'd probably just missed him. But I didn't miss him. I know I didn't. I worked one more late shift after that. Then I asked to go back to afternoons. I told them I needed the earlier hours for a class I was taking. They didn't push it. I still think about it sometimes. About the way he stood there, perfectly still, staring at that painting. About the way he looked at me, his face completely blank. About how he just vanished. I never found out who he was. No one else ever mentioned seeing him. The security footage from that night was overwritten after a week. Standard policy, so there's no way to check now. To this day, I don't know where he went, or why he was there, or what he wanted. But every time I walk past that museum, I think about him standing in that corner, hands in his pockets, staring at a painting of a harbor. And I wonder if he's still there. The petrol station was one of those old-fashioned ones, the kind with just 2 pumps and a small shop attached. I'd been working there for about 4 months, covering the overnight shift 3 nights a week. It was decent money for what it was, mostly just sitting behind the counter, restocking shelves and serving the occasional lorry driver or someone coming back from a night out. The station sat about 8 miles outside town, right where the A road curved through farmland. During the day, you'd get a steady trickle of customers, but after midnight, it was dead quiet. Sometimes I'd go 2 or 3 hours without seeing a single car. I didn't mind it, really. I'd bring my laptop and catch up on coursework, or just scroll through my phone. The pay was better than stacking shelves at the supermarket, and I could usually get some reading done. That night started like any other. I'd clocked in at 11, done the usual checks, till float, stock levels, checked the toilets were locked from the outside like they were supposed to be after 10. The previous shift guy, Martin, had left me a note saying the card reader was playing up again, but it seemed fine when I tested it. By midnight, I'd settled in behind the counter with a cup of tea and my phone. The first time the car pulled in, it was just after 3. I noticed the headlights sweeping across the shop windows, then heard the engine cut out by pump 2. A moment later, the door chimed and a man walked in. Middle-aged, maybe late 40s, wearing a dark coat and jeans. Nothing unusual about him. He didn't look at me. He just walked straight to the refrigerated section at the back and picked up a bottle of water. Paid in cash. 2 pounds exactly. I gave him his receipt, and he left without a word. I didn't think anything of it. People stop for all sorts of reasons at that hour. Long drives, can't sleep, whatever. I watched his car pull back onto the road and disappear toward town. Maybe 6 or 7 minutes later, the same car pulled in again. I recognized the make, a dark blue Vauxhall, older model. The man came back in, same coat, same blank expression. This time he bought a packet of mints, paid in cash again, exact change. He didn't say anything, didn't make eye contact, just took his receipt and left. That was when I started paying attention. It was odd, sure, but not alarming. Maybe he'd forgotten something, or realized he needed mints for the drive. I watched him get back in his car and pull out onto the road, heading in the same direction as before. 5 minutes later, he came back. This time he bought a chocolate bar, same routine, walked in, went straight to the shelf, brought it to the counter, paid in exact change, left. He still hadn't looked at me properly. His face was just blank. Not unfriendly, not threatening, just empty. Like he was going through motions. My gut was telling me something was off, but I couldn't put my finger on what. I thought about saying something, asking if he was okay or if he needed help, but I didn't. He wasn't doing anything wrong, technically, just buying things and leaving. I told myself I was being paranoid. Yet it was 3 a.m. and I was alone in the middle of nowhere. Of course I was going to feel jumpy. But then he came back again. Another 5 minutes, maybe 6. This time he bought a bottle of Lucozade. Same exact process. Walked in, picked something, paid, left. I watched him through the window as he got back in his car. He didn't drive away immediately this time. He sat there for a moment, engine running, just staring straight ahead. Then he pulled out and drove off. I checked the time. 3:22 a.m. I had another 3.5 hours before the next shift started at 7. The station felt very quiet suddenly. I could hear the hum of the refrigerators, the faint buzz of the overhead lights. Outside, the forecourt was empty. The road was dark in both directions. I thought about calling someone. My manager, maybe. Or even the police. But what would I say? A man kept coming in and buying things? That wasn't illegal. I'd sound ridiculous. I figured I was just in my head, making something out of nothing. He came back 3 more times over the next hour. Each time, a different item. A packet of crisps, a can of Red Bull, a sandwich. Each time, exact change. Each time, no words, no eye contact, just in and out. And each time, he'd sit in his car for a moment before driving off, always heading in the same direction. I started keeping the receipts separate just to make sure I wasn't imagining it. 7 transactions. 7 separate times he'd come in. Always alone. Always the same routine. Around 4:30, I moved away from the counter and stood near the back of the shop, by the storage room door. I don't know why. But I just didn't want to be right there by the entrance anymore. Every instinct told me to lock the door, but I couldn't. It was a 24-hour station, and I'd get in trouble if anyone reported it. When he came in the 8th time, I was standing by the coffee machine. He walked in, and for the first time, he looked directly at me. Not for long, just a glance, maybe 2 seconds. But it was enough. His expression still hadn't changed. Blank, empty. He picked up a packet of biscuits, brought it to the counter, and waited. I had to walk over to ring it up. My hands were shaking slightly as I scanned it. He paid, exact change again, and left. I watched him get back in his car. This time he didn't drive off. He just sat there, engine idling, staring at the shop. I should have called the police then. I know that now, but I didn't. Well, I told myself he'd leave eventually, that he was just some weirdo and I was overreacting. I went into the back room and stood there for a few minutes, trying to calm down. When I came back out, his car was gone. He didn't come back after that. I don't know if he finally left for good or if he just parked somewhere nearby. I spent the rest of the shift jumping at every sound, every set of headlights that passed on the road. At 7, when Martin came in for the morning shift, I didn't mention it. I didn't know how to explain it in a way that didn't sound stupid. I quit 2 weeks later. Told my manager I had found something closer to campus. I didn't go into details. I still think about it sometimes. I've tried to make sense of it. Maybe he was on drugs or having some kind of breakdown or just messing with me for kicks. But the thing that gets me is how deliberate it felt. Like he was testing something, seeing how long it would take before I reacted or how much I'd tolerate before I did something. I never found out who he was. I never saw the car again. And I still don't know what he wanted. The photo album showed up in the first donation bag at 7:30. I'd been volunteering at the charity shop for about 5 weeks. Tuesday and Thursday evenings, sorting donations in the back room while the main shop closed up front. It was mostly clothes and books, sometimes kitchen stuff. The manager, Carol, usually left around 8, and I'd lock up at 9. Simple enough. I work data entry during the day. Nothing special, but I wanted to do something that felt useful. The shop was tucked between a laundrette and a bedding shop on the high street, the kind of place that smelled like old books and fabric softener. The back room was cramped, fluorescent lights that flickered if you turned them on too fast, metal shelving units stacked with black bin bags waiting to be sorted. That Tuesday was quiet. Carol had already gone through most of the day's donations. She left me with 3 bags to sort and price, said she'd see me Thursday, locked the front door on her way out. I heard her car start up in the alley behind the building. The album was in the second bag I opened. Dark green cover, the old-fashioned kind with the sticky pages and plastic film. I flipped through it. Holiday photos. Looked like the 80s or 90s. A family at the seaside. A couple standing in front of a caravan. A little girl on a swing. Nothing remarkable. No names written anywhere. I set it aside in the books and media box and kept sorting. Mostly jumpers and a few chipped mugs. Around 8:15, the bell above the front door chimed. I stopped. Carol had locked it. I was sure I'd heard the deadbolt slide, and I walked to the doorway between the back room and the shop floor. The lights were off out front, just the orange glow from the street lamp outside. The door was still closed, locked as far as I could see. "Hello?" I called out. Nothing. I told myself it was the wind or something shifting. Old building, weird noises. I went back to the sorting. 10 minutes later, there was a black bin bag sitting by the back door, the door that opened onto the alley. I stared at it. I hadn't heard anyone come in. The back door was supposed to be locked from the inside. I walked over and tried the handle. Locked. My gut was telling me something was off, but I couldn't figure out what. Maybe Carol had left it there earlier and I just hadn't noticed. I opened the bag. Inside was the same photo album. Dark green cover. Same pictures. Seaside. Caravan. A little girl on a swing. I pulled it out and compared it to the one I'd already sorted. Identical, same creases on the cover. Same slightly yellowed pages. I checked the back. No names, no inscriptions, just the photos. I stood there for a moment, holding both albums. It didn't make sense. Duplicates, maybe? Someone cleaning out a relative's house? Accidentally packed the same album twice? I put the second one in the box with the first and kept working. At 8:50, the bell above the front door chimed again. I walked out to the shop floor. The door was still closed, still locked. But there was another black bin bag sitting just inside, right by the mat. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I checked the door. Locked. I checked the back door. Locked. I opened the bag. Same album, same photos. I pulled out my phone. Oh, no signal. The shop was in a bit of a dead zone. Happened sometimes. I thought about calling Carol from the landline in the office, but what would I even say? Someone's donating photo albums? It sounded ridiculous. I told myself I was being paranoid. It was just donations. Weird timing, but that's all it was. I put the third album in the box and checked my watch. 8:55. I decided to finish up early. I grabbed my coat and bag from the back room, turned off the lights, and headed for the front door. There was someone standing outside. They were across the street, under the street lamp, by the bus stop. Just standing there, facing the shop. I couldn't make out much detail through the glass. Dark coat, hands in pockets. They weren't moving. I watched them for a moment. They didn't move, didn't look away. And every instinct told me to leave through the back, but the alley was narrow and unlit, and I didn't know if it was safer. At least the high street had other shops, even if most were closed. The kebab place 2 doors down was still open, lights on. I unlocked the front door, stepped out, locked it behind me, and walked quickly toward the kebab shop. I didn't look back at the person under the street lamp. I made it about 10 steps before I heard footsteps behind me. Not running, just walking. Steady, even pace. I sped up. The footsteps matched my pace. I reached the kebab shop and pushed inside. The guy behind the counter looked up. I must have looked rattled because he asked if I was all right. I said I was fine, just cold, and ordered a coffee I didn't want. I sat by the window and looked out. The person was gone. I waited 20 minutes, finished the coffee, and walked to my car. It was parked in the alley behind the shop, next to where Carol usually parked. I kept my keys in my hand the whole way, checking over my shoulder every few steps. The alley was empty. I got in, locked the doors, and started the engine. There was a black bin bag on the passenger seat. I hadn't left it there. I knew I hadn't. I don't even keep bags in my car. I sat there, engine running, staring at it. My hands were shaking. I thought about just driving, leaving it there. But I couldn't. I had to know. I opened it. Same album, same photos. I threw it into the back seat, reversed out of the alley, and drove home faster than I should have. I didn't go back to the shop Thursday. I texted Carol and said I wasn't feeling well. She said, "No problem, feel better soon." But I didn't tell her what happened. I still haven't. I drove past the shop a week later during the day. It looked normal. I thought about going in, asking Carol if anyone had been donating photo albums, but I didn't. I don't know what I'd even say. I still have the album. The one from my car, I don't know why I kept it. I've looked through it a dozen times. I've searched online for the locations in the photos, tried reverse image searches, nothing. Just a family I don't know, in places I don't recognize. To this day, I don't know who left those bags. I don't know how they got into the shop or into my car. I don't know why it was always the same album or what they wanted. I still think about the person standing under the street lamp, the way they didn't move, the way they just watched. I never went back to the charity shop. Well, Carol stopped texting after a while. I found a different place to volunteer, somewhere with more people, better lighting, doors that stay locked. But sometimes late at night, I wonder if they're still out there, still donating, still watching. And I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed until 9. The job wasn't much, but it paid rent. I'd been working at the convenience store for about 7 months, mostly covering the overnight shift Thursday through Sunday. It was one of those places that stays open all night, the kind you see off the motorway, with bright fluorescent lights and a car park that's always half empty. The pay was minimum wage, and the hours were rough, but I didn't mind being alone. Most nights I'd get maybe 10 customers between midnight and 6 a.m. Lorry drivers, people coming off late shifts, the occasional drunk buying crisps. That Thursday started normal enough. I clocked in at 11 p.m., did the usual checks, Restocked the fridges, swept the aisles, made sure the coffee machine was working. My manager had texted earlier saying the CCTV system was down for maintenance. Something about the company upgrading to cloud storage. He said a technician would come by sometime next week. I didn't think much of it. The cameras had been glitchy for months anyway. Around midnight, a man came in. I noticed him because he didn't go straight to the aisles like most people do. He just stood near the entrance for a moment, looking around. He was maybe mid-40s, wearing a dark jacket and jeans. Nothing about him seemed particularly off, but I've learned to pay attention when someone lingers too long without shopping. He walked up to the counter. "What time do you close?" I pointed to the sign on the door. "We're 24 hours. He nodded slowly, like he was processing that information, then turned and left without buying anything. I went back to scrolling through my phone. About 20 minutes later, the door chimed again. Same man. This time he walked down the crisp aisle, picked up a bag of ready salted, and brought it to the counter. As I scanned it, he asked again, "What time do you close?" I paused. "We don't close. It's a 24-hour shop." He paid in exact change, took the crisps, and left. Maybe I should have felt something then, but I didn't. People ask weird questions all the time when they're tired or distracted. I figured he just wasn't paying attention. Then he came back at 1:10. This time he didn't buy anything. He walked straight to the counter and asked the same question. "What time do you close?" My gut started to tighten. "We're open all night. 24 hours. He stared at me for a few seconds longer than felt normal, then turned and walked out. I watched him through the window. Yet he got into a car, parked near the air pump. But he didn't drive away. He just sat there. I could see the shape of him in the driver's seat, lit faintly by the glow of the forecourt lights. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe he was waiting for someone. Maybe he was on a phone call. Maybe he was just tired and confused. But something felt off. I kept glancing out the window every few minutes, and every time I did, the car was still there. At 1:30, he came back in. He didn't browse this time. He walked directly to the counter, leaned forward slightly and asked, "What time do you close?" I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "We don't close," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're open all night, every night." He didn't respond. He just looked at me, his face blank, like he was waiting for me to say something else. Then he left again. I thought about calling the police. I even picked up my phone and opened the keypad, but what would I say? A man keeps asking me what time we close? He hadn't threatened me. He hadn't done anything illegal. I could already imagine the operator's voice. Is he being aggressive? Has he tried to enter a restricted area? Asterisk. No. He was just asking a question. I put my phone down. I regret that now. At 2 a.m., he came in again. This time he bought a bottle of water. As I handed him his change, he asked, "What time do you close?" I didn't answer. I just stared at him. He took the water and left. I locked the door. I know you're not supposed to do that. The shop's meant to stay open. But I didn't care, and I turned the lock and flipped the sign to closed, even though we never close. Then I stood behind the counter and watched the car park. He got out of his car. He walked up to the door and tried the handle. When it didn't open, he stood there for a moment, his face close to the glass, looking in at me. Then he knocked. Not aggressive, just a polite tap, 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 like he was a normal customer who'd arrived at an inconvenient time. I didn't move. He knocked again, louder this time. Then he stepped back and just stood there, staring through the window. His expression didn't change. He wasn't angry or confused. He was just waiting. I pulled out my phone and called my manager. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. I tried again. Voicemail. I thought about calling the police again, but I still wasn't sure what I'd say. He was just standing there. He hadn't tried to break in. He hadn't shouted or threatened me. He was just standing there. Every instinct told me to leave, but I couldn't. The back exit led to a delivery area that was completely unlit, and I'd have to cross the car park to get to my car anyway. I was safer inside. At 2:30, he walked back to his car. I thought he was leaving, but he didn't get in. He opened the boot, rummaged around for a moment, then closed it and walked back toward the shop. I couldn't see what he was holding. His hands were at his sides, but the way he moved was deliberate, purposeful. He stopped at the door again and knocked. This time he didn't stop. He kept knocking, the same steady rhythm over and over. Tap, 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 tap. I called 999. The operator asked if I was in immediate danger, and I said I didn't know. She said she'd send someone, but it might take 15 to 20 minutes. There'd been a serious accident on the motorway and units were tied up. She told me to stay on the line. The knocking stopped. I looked up. He was gone. The car park was empty. His car was still there, but he wasn't. The operator was asking me something, but I wasn't listening. I was trying to figure out where he'd gone. The shop has big windows on 3 sides. I should have been able to see him, but he just vanished. Then I heard it. A sound from the back of the shop. The staff toilet door creaking open. I don't know how he got in. The back door was locked. I'd checked it myself at the start of my shift. But I heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming up the hallway toward the front. I ran. I unlocked the front door and sprinted across the car park to my car. I didn't look back. I got in, locked the doors, and drove. I didn't stop until I was halfway home. The police went to the shop about 20 minutes later. They said there was no one there. No sign of forced entry. The back door was still locked. They checked the CCTV, but of course it wasn't working. My manager was pissed off that I'd left the shop unattended. I tried to explain, but he just said I'd overreacted. Maybe I did. Maybe the guy was just confused or high or mentally unwell. Maybe he never got inside, and I imagined the footsteps, but I don't think so. I still think about the way he stared at me through the glass, the way he kept asking the same question over and over, like he was waiting for me to give him a different answer. I quit 2 days later. I never went back. To this day, I don't know what he wanted or what would have happened if I'd stayed. The VR arcade closed to customers at 11 on weeknights, but someone had to stay until 1 a.m. to clean the booths and run system updates. I'd been doing it for about 2 months, 3 nights a week. The pay was decent for what it was. Mostly just wiping down headsets and making sure nothing was broken. The place was in one of those new retail parks on the edge of town, the kind with a cinema and a chain restaurant that always looked busy from the outside but never actually was. At night, the car park emptied out fast. By the time I locked the front doors at 11, there were maybe 4 cars left, all clustered near the cinema entrance. I started with booth 12, the one furthest from the front desk. Standard routine. Wipe down the headset, check the controllers, spray the floor mat. The booths were small, maybe 6 feet by 6 feet. He padded walls to stop people walking into things. Each one had a little screen outside showing whether it was occupied or available. All of them showed green, available, once I locked up. The booking system was automated. Customers could reserve time slots online, and the screens would update automatically. During business hours, it made sense. After hours, though, The system was supposed to be offline. I'd never seen it do anything once we closed. I was halfway through booth 9 when I heard the chime. It was the same sound that played when someone made a booking, a soft two-tone beep from the front desk computer. I stopped wiping and listened. Nothing else. I figured it was probably just the system cycling through some update. IT had been messing with the software all week. I finished booth 9 and moved to booth 8. The screen outside still showed green. I pushed the door open and started cleaning. Another chime. This time I walked back to the front desk. The monitor showed the booking grid, all the time slots for the evening. Booth 12, the one I'd cleaned first, now had a red block over the 11:20 p.m. slot. Reserved. I stared at it for a second. It was 11:34 p.m. The slot had already passed. Probably a glitch. I clicked on it to cancel the reservation, and the block disappeared. The screen went back to green. I went back to cleaning. Booth 7, booth 6. I was getting into a rhythm, trying not to think about how quiet it was. The arcade had this low ambient hum from all the computers running, but once you noticed it, you couldn't stop hearing it. It made the silence feel heavier. Chime. I didn't go back to the desk right away, as I told myself it was nothing. Just the system acting up, But my gut was telling me something else. That sinking feeling you get when you know you should pay attention but you don't want to. I finished booth 6 and checked the front desk. Booth 9 this time. Reserved for 11:48 p.m. I looked at my phone. It was 11:51. Another expired slot. I canceled it and went back to work. The thing is, I almost called someone then. My manager maybe, or even the non-emergency police line. But what would I say, the computer's making bookings after hours? It sounded stupid. Even in my head, I figured I'd mention it in the morning, let IT deal with it. I kept cleaning. Booth 5. Booth 4. I was moving faster now, wanting to get it done and leave. The car park outside was completely empty when I glanced through the front windows, and even the cinema crowd had cleared out. Chime. I didn't check the desk. I just kept working. Booth 3. Spray wipe. Check the controllers. My hands were moving on autopilot. I could feel my heart beating a little faster than it should have been. Chime. I stopped. Put down the cleaning spray. Walked to the front desk. Booth 8. Reserved for 12:03 a.m. I checked my phone. It was 12:06. Every booth I'd cleaned had been rebooked. The time slots were always a few minutes in the past, like someone was following behind me, booking the booth right after I left it. I stood there staring at the screen. The arcade felt too big suddenly. Too many booths. Too many dark corners. I turned around slowly, scanning the rows of doors. All of them closed. All of them showing green. Except booth 8. The screen outside booth 8 was red and occupied. I hadn't touched that booth in 20 minutes. I should have left then. I know that now. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to grab my coat and walk out. But I didn't. I told myself it was a malfunction. The door sensor was faulty. Something stupid and explainable. I walked over to booth 8. Stood outside the door. The red light glowed softly. I pressed my ear against the padding. Nothing. No sound. No movement. I opened the door. The booth was empty. Headset on the hook, controllers on the shelf, everything exactly how I'd left it. But the floor mat was wet, not damp, wet, like someone had just stepped off it. I backed out and closed the door. The screen flickered, then turned green. Chime. I didn't look at the desk. I grabbed my coat and keys and headed for the front door. But my hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped the keys trying to unlock it. As I pushed the door open, I heard it one more time. Chime. I got in my car and locked the doors. Sat there for a minute trying to steady my breathing. Then I looked back at the arcade. Every single booth screen was red. I drove home. Didn't stop. Didn't look back. I texted my manager at 12:47 a.m. and said I felt sick. Couldn't finish the shift. He replied the next morning asking if I'd locked up properly. I lied and said yes. I went back 2 days later for my next shift. The booths were fine. The system was fine. My manager said IT had pushed an update that night and it might have caused some weird behavior. He didn't seem concerned. I didn't tell him about the wet floor mat. I didn't tell him I'd left the building unlocked. I quit 3 weeks later. I told them I'd found something closer to home. I still think about it sometimes. The bookings, the wet mat, the way every screen turned red at once. I never figured out if someone was actually in there with me or if it was all just the system going haywire. But I remember that feeling. Standing outside booth 8, knowing I shouldn't open the door, and doing it anyway. I don't work night shifts anymore. The promenade stretched about 2 miles along the seafront, mostly deserted this time of year. Off-season meant October through March, which is when the council hired me and 2 other guys to do repairs and maintenance. Benches, railings, that sort of thing. Most nights we worked in pairs, but Wednesdays I did the late shift alone because it was just inspections and minor fixes. Nothing that needed 2 people. I'd been doing it for about 4 months. The pay was decent and I didn't mind working nights. Gave me time to think, listen to podcasts, that sort of thing. The promenade had those old Victorian street lamps every 30 meters or so. The kind that gave off this yellowish light that barely reached the benches. Beyond the railing was just darkness and the sound of waves hitting the concrete below. And that night I started at the north end like always around 11 p.m. The checklist was straightforward. Walk the route, note any damage, tighten loose bolts, replace broken slats. I had a toolbox on wheels that I dragged along. One of those metal cases that rattled no matter how carefully you pulled it. The wind was picking up, coming in cold off the water. I could taste salt in the air. I'd checked maybe 6 benches when I got to the one near the old pier entrance. Someone had carved initials into the backrest deep enough that I'd need to sand it down and re-varnish. I made a note on my phone, then got to work. It took maybe 15 minutes. When I finished, I moved on to the next section, maybe 50 meters down. That's when I saw him, just sitting there on the bench I'd literally just left. And I could see him clearly under the street lamp. Middle-aged guy, I think. Dark coat, hands in his pockets, just sitting there facing the sea. I figured he'd walked up while I was working on the next bench. The promenade wasn't closed or anything. People could walk it whenever they wanted, though most didn't bother this late, especially midweek in October. I didn't think much of it. I kept working. 3 more benches, all fine, except for some gull droppings I wiped off. When I looked back toward the pier, the guy was gone. The bench was empty. Another 5 benches down, I found one with a broken slat, completely snapped through, probably someone standing on it. I pulled out my drill and the replacement slat I'd brought in the van. It was a bigger job, maybe 20 minutes. I had my headphones in, now half listening to some true crime podcast, focusing on getting the bolts lined up right. When I finished and turned around, he was sitting on the bench again, the one I'd just repaired. I pulled my headphones out. The wind had died down a bit, and I could hear the waves more clearly now, this rhythmic crash and hiss. He was in the exact same position, hands in pockets, facing the water. He hadn't moved, as far as I could tell. Hadn't even turned his head. My gut told me something was off, but I couldn't put my finger on what. I mean, it's a public space. Maybe he liked that particular bench. Maybe he was waiting for someone. I told myself I was being paranoid. I'd been listening to too many murder podcasts. I kept going. 4 more benches, all minor stuff. I glanced back a few times. He was still there, same position. And I checked my phone. It was nearly midnight. I'd been out here almost an hour, and he'd been sitting there for at least 20 minutes without moving. Not checking his phone, not smoking, nothing. Just sitting. I finished another bench, and when I looked back, he was gone again. The promenade curved slightly as it headed south, following the coastline. I lost sight of the pier area for maybe 10 minutes while I worked through a section near the old bandstand. When I came around the curve, I could see further down the promenade, maybe 100 meters ahead. He was sitting on a bench down there. I was pretty sure it was the same guy. Same dark coat, same posture. I stopped walking. I just stood there with my toolbox, trying to make sense of it. He would have had to walk past me to get down there. The promenade was completely open. Oh, no side paths or stairs in this section. I would have seen him. I would have heard him. But I hadn't. I pulled out my phone, thought about calling someone, my supervisor maybe, or even the police. But what would I say? There's a guy sitting on a bench? I'd sound insane. I put my phone away. I kept working, but I was watching him now. He didn't move. I did 3 more benches, getting closer each time. By the time I was 2 benches away from him, I could see more details. Older than I'd thought, maybe 60s. Pale skin. He was wearing a dark wool coat, the kind with a collar that came up high. His hands were still in his pockets. I walked past him to the next bench. He didn't turn his head, didn't acknowledge me at all. I was maybe 3 meters away, and I could have sworn he wasn't breathing. His chest wasn't moving. The collar of his coat wasn't shifting in the wind. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to leave. Just get in the van and go home. But I had another mile of promenade to cover, and I'd already logged the shift. If I left early, I'd have to explain why. I finished the bench I was working on and moved to the next one. When I looked back, he was gone. I was near the south end now, maybe 15 minutes from finishing. The street lamps were spaced further apart here, and the pools of light didn't quite meet. I was working in one of the darker sections when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from behind me. I turned around. He was walking toward me. Same coat, same posture, but now he was moving. His hands were still in his pockets. His face was completely blank. No expression at all. He wasn't looking at me exactly. More like looking through me. He walked past me, maybe 2 meters away, and sat down on the bench I'd just repaired. The one I'd literally just tightened the bolts on 30 seconds ago. I should have run. I know that now. But I just stood there, toolbox in hand, watching him. He sat down, put his hands in his pockets, and stared out at the water. Like all the other times, I didn't say anything. I don't know why. I just picked up my toolbox and walked. Fast, but not running. I didn't want to run. Some part of me thought if I ran, he'd follow. I made it back to the van, threw the toolbox in the back, and got in. I locked the doors immediately. My hands were shaking. I sat there for maybe 5 minutes, trying to calm down, telling myself I'd imagined it or misunderstood what I'd seen. I looked out at the promenade. I could just barely see the bench from where I was parked. He was still sitting there. Still hadn't moved. I started the van and left. I didn't finish the route. I called my supervisor the next morning and told him I'd felt sick, had to leave early. He didn't ask questions. I requested a shift change after that. Told them I needed mornings for personal reasons. They moved me to the daytime crew without much fuss. I never saw him again. I don't know who he was or what he wanted. I drove past that section of the promenade a few weeks later during the day, and all the benches looked fine. No one sitting on them. Just empty wood and metal, same as always. I still think about it sometimes, about how he kept appearing on the benches I'd just worked on, about how he moved without me hearing him, about that blank expression. I never got answers. I don't think I want them. The porta-cabin smelled like instant coffee and damp plywood. I'd been working as a site administrator for about 3 months, covering the evening shift Monday through Thursday, while the main crew was off. My job was basically to answer emails, process timesheets, and make sure nobody broke in to steal copper wire or power tools. The site was a new housing development on the edge of town, about 40 half-built houses spread across muddy fields. During the day, it was loud, full of workers and machinery, but after 6 p.m., it was just me in a small office with a space heater and a kettle. That Thursday started normal. I clocked in at 6, made myself a cup of tea, and sat down at the desk to go through the day's paperwork. The site manager had left me a note about some missing invoices, and so I spent the first hour sorting through filing cabinets and scanning documents. Outside, the light was fading fast. By 7, it was fully dark, and the only illumination came from a few floodlights mounted on poles around the perimeter fence. I didn't think much of it when I heard the first knock. It was around 7:30, maybe 20 to 8. 3 sharp raps on the porta-cabin door. I assumed it was a delivery driver or maybe one of the workers who'd forgotten something. I opened the door and there was a man standing at the bottom of the steps. He was maybe mid-40s, wearing a dark coat and jeans. Clean-shaven, short hair, nothing particularly memorable about him. He smiled when I opened the door. "Evening," he said. "You hiring?" I told him we weren't taking on anyone new at the moment, but he could leave his details with the main office during business hours. He nodded, thanked me, and walked off toward the site entrance. I watched him go, then shut the door and went back to my desk. 20 minutes later, he knocked again. Same 3 raps, same rhythm. I opened the door, and he was standing in the exact same spot, same posture, same smile. "Evening," he said. "You hiring?" I felt a flicker of confusion. "I just told you we're not," I said, "about 20 minutes ago." He looked at me like I'd said something strange. "Oh," he said. "Right. Sorry. Must have forgot." He turned and walked away again. Same direction, same pace. I stood there for a moment, watching him disappear into the darkness beyond the floodlights. Something felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Maybe he had some kind of memory issue. Maybe he was on something. I told myself it wasn't my problem and went back inside. I tried to focus on the invoices, but I kept glancing at the door. The porta-cabin had 2 small windows, one on either side of the entrance, but they were covered with those slatted blinds that didn't close properly. I could see slivers of the site outside, the skeletal frames of the houses, the mud churned up by diggers. Another 20 minutes passed. Then the knock came again. I didn't open the door this time. I stood up and looked through the blinds. He was there, standing at the bottom of the steps, hands in his coat pockets, waiting. My gut was telling me not to open it. I stayed where I was, watching him through the slats. He knocked again, louder this time. Then he called out, "Hello? You in there?" I didn't answer. After a moment, he stepped back and looked up at the porta-cabin, like he was trying to see through the windows. Then he turned and walked away again. I sat back down, but I couldn't concentrate. I kept checking the windows, listening for footsteps. The site was completely silent except for the hum of the space heater and the occasional creak of the porta-cabin settling. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even say? A man knocked on my door 3 times, asking about work. They'd think I was wasting their time. I figured maybe he'd given up and left. Then, around 9:15, I heard footsteps on the gravel outside, not walking toward the door, circling the porta-cabin. Slow, deliberate steps, crunching on the loose stones. I stood up and moved to the side window, peering through the blinds. I couldn't see him, but I could hear him. He was walking around the perimeter, stopping every few feet. I heard him try the handle on the back door, the one that led to the storage area. It was locked, but the sound of it rattling made my stomach drop. I pulled out my phone. No signal. The site was in a bit of a dead zone, and I usually had to walk up to the entrance to get a bar or two. I thought about making a run for my car, but it was parked about 50 meters away near the site entrance, and I'd have to cross open ground to get to it. The footsteps stopped. For a long moment there was nothing. Then I heard him at the front door again, but this time he didn't knock. He just stood there. I could see his shadow through the gap in the blinds, a dark shape blocking the floodlight. "I know you're in there," he said. His voice was calm, almost friendly. "You just want to ask about the job." I didn't move, didn't breathe. Every instinct told me to stay quiet. He tried the door handle. It was locked, but the porta-cabin wasn't exactly Fort Knox. The whole structure was just thin walls and a flimsy bolt. If he really wanted to get in, he could. Then he stepped back. I heard his footsteps again, moving away from the door. I shifted to the other window and caught a glimpse of him walking toward the nearest half-built house. He stopped at the entrance, turned, and looked back at the porta-cabin. Just stood there, staring. I grabbed my coat and keys. I wasn't staying there any longer. I unlocked the door as quietly as I could, stepped out, and locked it behind me. The cold air hit me immediately, and I could see my breath in the floodlight. He was still standing by the house. He was about 30 meters away. When he saw me, he started walking toward me. I didn't run. I walked quickly toward my car, keys already in my hand. My gut was screaming at me to move faster, but I didn't want to look like I was panicking. I could hear his footsteps behind me, steady and unhurried. "Wait," he called out. "I just need to ask you something." I didn't stop. I reached my car, unlocked it, and got in. I locked the doors immediately and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, I could see him standing in the middle of the site, watching me. He didn't chase. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, completely still. I drove out through the site entrance and didn't look back until I was on the main road. My hands were shaking so badly I had to pull over at a petrol station to calm down. I called my boss and told him I'd had to leave early because I felt ill. I didn't mention the man. I didn't know how to explain it without sounding paranoid. I never went back to that shift. I told them I needed to switch to daytime hours for personal reasons, and they didn't push it. Someone else took over the evening admin. I still don't know what he wanted. The way he kept coming back, asking the same question, like he was stuck in a loop. The way he circled the porta cabin. The way he just stood there, watching me leave. I think about it sometimes, late at night. Whether he's still going to construction sites, knocking on doors, asking if they're hiring. Whether he was ever really looking for work at all. I should have called the police the second time he knocked. I know that now. But at the time I kept talking myself out of it. He kept thinking I was overreacting. I never got any answers. I never found out who he was. And to this day, I don't know what would have happened if I'd stayed. The viewing gallery runs along the entire length of the pool, floor-to-ceiling windows on one side, rows of plastic seats on the other. I'd been working at the leisure center for about 9 months, mostly doing reception and lifeguard cover. But they needed someone for the late shift twice a week to handle the adult swim sessions that ran until 11 p.m. That Thursday was quiet. We'd had maybe 6 people total between 9 and 10:30, all regulars doing their laps. The last one left at 11:15, an older guy who always did exactly 40 lengths, then left without showering. I watched him push through the turnstile, heard his car start in the car park, then went back to the gallery to start my closing checklist. The pool was completely still. The overhead lights hummed, yet that constant electrical buzz that you stop noticing after the first hour. I had my clipboard and my phone, a bottle of water I'd bought from the vending machine downstairs. The heating was set too high like always, that thick chlorine smell mixing with the stale air. I started with the chemical readings, wrote down the numbers, checked the filter pressure gauge through the window that looked into the plant room. Everything normal. I was supposed to do a visual sweep of the pool deck every 15 minutes until I locked up at midnight, make sure no one had left anything behind. Check the changing rooms, turn off the underwater lights. That's when I saw him. He was standing at the deep end, right at the edge of the pool, hands in his pockets, just standing there completely still, staring down into the water. I stopped mid-step. And the thing is, I hadn't heard the turnstile. I hadn't heard the door to the pool deck open. The building was dead silent except for the ventilation system and the filter pumps. And those doors were heavy fire doors that always made noise. I walked closer to the window, pressed my hand against the glass. He was wearing dark clothes, maybe a coat or a hoodie, I couldn't tell from that angle. Medium height, average build, nothing distinctive. But he wasn't moving at all, not even shifting his weight. Just standing there looking down at the water, like he was waiting for something to surface. My gut told me something was wrong, but I talked myself down. Maybe he'd come in while I was in the plant room checking the gauges. Maybe I'd just missed him. It happens. People wander in sometimes thinking we're still open and see the lights on and assume they can swim. I picked up the phone. We kept on the desk in the gallery, the internal one that connects to reception downstairs. I was about to call down, ask if anyone had checked in after the last swimmer left, but then I stopped. What was I going to say? There's a guy standing by the pool. He wasn't doing anything. He was just standing there. I put the phone down and decided to go down myself. There's a door from the gallery that leads directly to the pool deck. Saves you having to go all the way around through reception. I pushed through it, felt the humidity hit me properly. That wet heat that clings to your skin. "Excuse me," I called out. "We're closed for the night. You'll need to leave." He didn't move, didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge me at all. I walked closer, and my trainers squeaking on the wet tiles. "Sir, we're closed. I need you to leave now." Still nothing. I was maybe 20 feet away from him now, close enough to see that he was wearing a dark gray hoodie, jeans, regular trainers. His hands were definitely in his pockets. His head was tilted down slightly, staring into the deep end like he'd dropped something down there. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave or I'll call security." That's when he turned around. His face was completely blank. Not angry, not confused, not embarrassed, just blank. He looked at me for a long moment, long enough that I felt my stomach drop. And then he smiled. Not a friendly smile, just his mouth moving into that shape. Then he turned back around and kept staring at the water. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to leave, to go back through the door, lock it, call the police. But I didn't. I stood there like an idiot trying to figure out what to do. He wasn't being aggressive. He wasn't threatening me, he was just standing there. What was I supposed to tell the police? A man is standing near a pool? I backed up slowly, went through the door to the gallery and locked it behind me. My hands were shaking. I picked up the phone again. This time I was going to call reception. But then I looked through the window. He was gone. The pool deck was empty. Completely empty. The water was still, the lights reflecting off the surface in those long, wavering lines. No one. I pressed my face against the glass, looked left and right. The changing room doors were closed. The fire exit at the far end had an alarm on it. It would have gone off if he'd used it. There was nowhere he could have gone that quickly without me seeing. I stood there for maybe 2 minutes, just staring, trying to make sense of it. Then I saw him again. Same spot. Deep end. Hands in pockets. Staring down at the water. I didn't go back down. I grabbed my phone. Thought about calling 999. But what was I going to say? I couldn't explain what I was seeing. I couldn't explain how he kept appearing and disappearing. They'd think I was wasting their time, or worse, that I was having some kind of episode. I did the only thing I could think of. I called my supervisor, left a voicemail saying I felt unwell and needed to leave early, that I'd locked the chemical store and the plant room but hadn't finished the closing checklist. Then I grabbed my coat and my bag and left through the gallery's rear exit. Here's the one that leads straight to the staff car park. I didn't look back at the pool. I didn't want to see if he was still there. The next day, my supervisor called me, asked if I was feeling better. I said yes, just a migraine. She said the opening shift supervisor had found everything locked up fine. No issues, pool was clean. I didn't ask if they'd found anyone inside. I worked 3 more shifts after that, all daytime ones. I requested to be taken off the late rotation, said I had childcare issues, which was a lie, because I don't have kids. They moved me without asking questions. I never went back to that viewing gallery at night. I still work at the leisure center, but I make sure I'm gone by 7 p.m. I don't know who that man was or what he was doing. I don't know how he got in or how he kept disappearing and reappearing. I don't know if he's still there sometimes, standing at the deep end, staring down into the water. But I still think about it, about the way he smiled at me, about how he never blinked, about how the pool was completely empty but he kept coming back to the same spot, like he was waiting for something. To this day, I don't know what he was looking for down there. The airport job wasn't supposed to be permanent. I'd been doing facilities maintenance there for about 5 months, covering the overnight shift Wednesday through Saturday. Landside terminal, which meant the public areas before security, check-in desks, baggage claim, the coffee shops and news agents that closed by 9 p.m. My shift started at 11 and ran until 7 a.m. Mostly I walked circuits, checked the bathrooms, were stocked, made sure the automatic doors weren't jamming, that sort of thing. It was a Tuesday in February when I picked up an extra shift. One of the other guys called in sick, and they offered me double time. So I said yes. I remember it was freezing that night, proper cold snap, the kind where your breath fogs. Even indoors, near the entrance doors, the terminal was nearly empty, and just a handful of people scattered around. A couple of taxi drivers waiting by the rank, a woman asleep across 3 chairs near baggage claim, someone at the far end, by the departure boards. I started my first circuit around midnight. The departure boards were still running even though the last flight had left at 10:30. They cycled through the same information over and over. Canceled, delayed until morning. I walked past them, checked the toilets on the ground floor, restocked some paper towels. Normal stuff. When I came back through the main concourse, maybe 20 minutes later, I noticed the man by the departure boards again. He was standing in the same spot, hands in his coat pockets, staring up at the screens. I didn't think much of it. People miss flights, people get stranded, happens all the time. I did another circuit, checked the lifts, made sure the vending machines weren't leaking, walked through the arrivals hall. It took me about half an hour. When I came back to the main concourse, he was still there. Same spot, same posture, still looking at the boards. That's when I started paying attention. Not because anything was wrong, exactly, but because it seemed odd. The boards weren't showing anything new. They hadn't changed in hours. But he just kept standing there. I went upstairs to check the mezzanine level. More bathrooms, a closed-down bookshop, some seating areas. When I came back down, I made a point of walking past him. He didn't look at me, just kept his eyes on the screens. He was maybe mid-40s, average height, dark coat, clean-shaven, nothing memorable, but something about the way he stood there, when I completely still, made my gut tighten a little. I told myself I was being paranoid. It was late, I was tired, and the terminal always felt weird when it was this empty. The fluorescent lights hummed too loud. The air conditioning made this low, droning sound, and every footstep echoed. I went back to my rounds. 15 minutes later, I walked past the departure boards again. He was gone. I felt relieved, honestly. I figured he'd finally left, caught a taxi, or called someone to pick him up. I finished checking the ground floor and headed toward the service corridor to grab a coffee from the staff room. That's when I saw him again. He was standing by the departure boards. Same spot, same posture. I stopped walking. I was maybe 30 meters away, near the entrance to the baggage claim area. I just stood there watching him. Yet he didn't move, didn't shift his weight, didn't check his phone, didn't look around, just stared at the screens. I checked my watch. It had been exactly 15 minutes since I'd last seen him there. My gut was telling me something was off, but I didn't know what. I thought about going over and asking if he needed help, but I didn't. I don't know why. Maybe because he seemed so focused, so intent, and I didn't want to interrupt whatever he was doing. Or maybe because some part of me didn't want to get closer. I went back to my rounds. I checked the upper level again, walked through the arrivals hall, restocked some soap dispensers. I kept looking at my watch. 14 minutes. 15 minutes. 16. When I came back to the main concourse, he was gone again. And then 15 minutes later, he was back. I started keeping track. And every time I completed a circuit and came back to the concourse, he was either there or he wasn't. But when he was there, he was always in the exact same spot, standing the exact same way. And when he wasn't, he'd reappear exactly 15 minutes later. It was around 2 a.m. when I started to feel genuinely uneasy. I'd seen him 5 times by then, maybe 6. Always the same. I thought about calling security, but what would I say? There's a man standing in a public terminal looking at departure boards. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He wasn't bothering anyone. He was just there. I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe he was waiting for someone. Maybe he had some kind of condition, some routine he needed to follow. People do strange things when they're stressed or tired. I kept working, but my gut wouldn't let it go. At around 3 a.m., I decided to test something. When I came back to the concourse and saw him standing there, I didn't walk past. I stopped at the far end near the closed coffee shop and just watched. I wanted to see what he did when I wasn't moving, when I wasn't part of the circuit. He didn't move. Not for 5 minutes. Not for 10. He just stood there, staring at the boards. I could see his chest rising and falling, so I knew he was breathing, but that was it. No fidgeting, no checking his phone, nothing. Then, at exactly 15 minutes, he turned and walked away. Not toward the exits, toward the service corridor. My stomach dropped. The service corridor wasn't public. It was staff only. Locked doors, access badges required. But I watched him walk straight toward it, and I didn't see him stop. I didn't see him turn back. I should have called someone then. I should have radioed security or called the police. But I didn't. I told myself maybe he'd just gone to the toilets nearby. Or maybe I'd lost sight of him in the shadows. I went back to my rounds. When I came back 15 minutes later, he was standing by the departure boards again. I didn't go near him after that. I changed my route, avoided the main concourse as much as I could. I checked the upper levels, stayed in the service areas, did the bare minimum. I kept looking at my watch, counting down the 15-minute intervals, and every time I knew he'd be back, my hands started shaking. Around 5 a.m., I was in the staff room trying to calm down when I heard footsteps in the corridor outside. Slow, steady footsteps. I looked through the little window in the door and saw him walking past. Same coat and same posture. He didn't look at the door. He just walked by, heading deeper into the service corridor. I locked the door. I stayed in that room until my shift ended at 7. When I finally came out, the terminal was starting to fill up with early morning passengers. I walked to the main concourse, and the departure boards were cycling through the morning flights. He wasn't there. I asked the day shift supervisor if anyone had reported anything strange overnight. He said no. I didn't tell him what I'd seen. I didn't know how to explain it. I never took another overnight shift at the airport. I handed in my notice 2 weeks later and got a job at a warehouse closer to home. I still think about it sometimes, though. About the way he stood there, so still, so focused. About the 15-minute intervals like clockwork. and about the fact that he knew where the service corridors were. I don't know who he was, I don't know what he wanted, and I really don't know how he kept getting back to that same spot over and over without me ever seeing him arrive. The ticket office at Millbrook Station wasn't much. Just a small glass booth with a counter, a computer that took 3 minutes to boot up, and a space heater that only worked if you kicked it twice. I'd been working there for about 7 months, covering the evening shift Monday through Thursday. The station itself was one of those small rural stops. 2 platforms, a waiting room that smelled like damp carpet, and a car park that held maybe 15 vehicles on a busy day. Most evenings were dead quiet. Rush hour ended around 6, and after that I'd maybe sell 2 or 3 tickets before closing at 10. The rest of the time I'd sit in the booth, doing coursework for my accounting qualification or scrolling through my phone. The pay was rubbish, but it was close to my flat and I could study, so I didn't complain. And that Tuesday started normal enough. I'd driven in around 4:30, parked in my usual spot near the bike racks, and opened up the booth. The computer took forever to load as always. I made myself a cup of tea from the kettle we kept on the filing cabinet and settled in. A few commuters came through between 5 and 6, regulars mostly, people I recognized but didn't really know. I sold 4 tickets to the city, 2 returns to Westford, and that was it. By 7, the platform was empty. The 6:47 to the city had left on time, and the next train wasn't until 8:15. I remember thinking I'd get a good chunk of reading done. I had an exam coming up, and I'd been putting off revising for weeks. The man appeared at the counter around 7:15. I didn't hear him come in, which was unusual because the door to the ticket office made this loud scraping sound against the floor, but suddenly he was just there standing in front of the glass looking at me. He was maybe mid-50s, wearing a dark coat and a flat cap. His face was ordinary, nothing remarkable about it. He didn't smile or say hello, just stared at me for a second before speaking. "What time's the next train to Barrowfield?" he asked. I blinked. "Sorry, where?" "Barrowfield," he repeated. His voice was flat, no emotion in it. I turned to the computer and pulled up the timetable. I'd been working there long enough to know most of the stops on our line, and I'd never heard of Barrowfield. I checked anyway, typing it into the search bar. Nothing came up. "I don't think we have a stop called Barrowfield," I said. Are you sure that's the right name?" He didn't answer, just kept staring at me through the glass. After a few seconds, he turned and walked away, out toward the platform. I watched him go, feeling a little uneasy but not really sure why. Maybe it was the way he'd stared, or the fact that he hadn't argued or asked for clarification. He'd just left. I went back to my textbook, tried to focus on depreciation schedules, but I kept glancing up at the CCTV monitor. The platform was empty. I couldn't see the man anywhere. I figured he'd left through the car park exit. 20 minutes later, he was back. Same spot at the counter. Same blank expression. This time, he didn't wait for me to speak. "What time's the next train to Barrowfield?" I frowned. "Like I said, we don't have a stop called Barrowfield." "Oh, maybe you're thinking of a different station. Barrowford's on the Northern Line, if that's what you mean." "Barrowfield," he said again. Same flat tone, no frustration, no confusion, just the same question. My gut was telling me something was off. I pulled up the timetable again, even though I knew it wouldn't help. "I'm sorry, but there's no train to Barrowfield from here." I can help you get to another station if you tell me where you're trying to go." He stared at me for another few seconds, then turned and walked away again. I watched him on the monitor. He went out onto the platform, stood near the edge for a moment, then disappeared from view. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe he was confused. Maybe he had dementia or something and genuinely didn't understand, but something about the way he'd asked, so calm, not so emotionless, made my skin crawl. I thought about calling my supervisor, but what would I even say? Some bloke asked about a train that doesn't exist? It sounded stupid. I went back to my textbook. The 8:15 came and went. A couple got off, bought tickets to Westford, and left. The platform was empty again. I checked the monitor. No sign of the man. At 10 to 9, he came back. Same question, same tone. "What time's the next train to Barrowfield?" This time I didn't bother checking the computer. "There is no train to Barrowfield," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've told you twice now, if you need help getting somewhere else, I can look it up, but I can't sell you a ticket to a place that doesn't exist." He didn't react, didn't blink, just stared at me through the glass. And for the first time I noticed how still he was. And not fidgeting, not shifting his weight, just perfectly, unnaturally still. Then he smiled. Not a warm smile, not a friendly smile. Just his mouth pulling back slightly at the corners, his eyes flat and empty. "What time's the next train to Barrowfield?" he asked again. I felt my stomach drop. Every instinct told me to lock the door to the booth, but I didn't. I just sat there, staring back at him, my heart pounding in my chest. He turned and walked away again. This time I watched him on the monitor until he disappeared behind the waiting room. I grabbed my phone and thought about calling the police. But what would I say? A man asked me the same question 3 times? They'd think I was wasting their time. I told myself I was overreacting, that he was just confused or messing with me or something. But I couldn't shake the feeling. Yes, the station was supposed to close at 10. At 9:30, I started shutting down the computer, counting the cash drawer, getting ready to lock up. I kept glancing at the monitor. The platform was empty. The car park was empty. I hadn't seen the man in over half an hour. I locked the booth and stepped outside. The air was cold, damp. The platform lights flickered slightly, casting long shadows across the tracks. I walked quickly toward the car park, my keys already in my hand. That's when I saw him. He was standing at the far end of the platform, near the footbridge, just standing there, facing me, not moving, not speaking, just watching. I didn't wait. I ran to my car, unlocked it, got in, and locked the doors. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I started the engine and reversed out of the space. In my headlights sweeping across the platform, he was still standing there, still watching. I drove home faster than I should have. Didn't stop until I was inside my flat with the door locked and the chain on. I called in sick the next day, told my supervisor I had food poisoning. I went back the day after that, but I kept the booth door locked the entire shift. I checked the CCTV footage from Tuesday night, but the cameras only cover the platform and the ticket office entrance. There's no footage of the car park or the footbridge. I never saw him again. Never found out who he was or what he wanted. I looked up Barrowfield online, spent hours searching. There's no station, no town, nothing. It doesn't exist. I still work at Millbrook, but I don't do evening shifts anymore. I asked to switch to mornings, and my supervisor didn't ask why. And sometimes I think about that night, about the way he smiled, about how calm he was. I still don't know what he wanted. I don't think I want to know. The car park was one of those big concrete ones attached to a shopping center. 7 floors, open air on the sides, completely empty at night once the shops closed at 10. I'd parked on the 5th floor that morning because the lower levels were full, and I'd worked late at the call center down the street. Customer service for a broadband company. Not exciting, but it paid all right. It was just past midnight when I left. The shopping center was dark, shutters down, security lights casting everything in that dim orange glow. I'd done this walk plenty of times before. The car park was free after 6 p.m., and I often stayed late to finish up tickets or avoid the evening traffic. Never had a problem. I took the stairwell up. The lift was one of those old ones that smelled like piss and took forever, so I usually just walked. 5 floors wasn't that bad. My knees disagreed, but I needed the exercise anyway. The stairwell was concrete, open on one side with metal railings. You could see out onto each level as you climbed. Fluorescent strips overhead, half of them flickering or just dead. I was on the 2nd floor landing when I heard the car. Engine noise echoing through the structure. Not unusual. Someone else leaving late, probably. I didn't think much of it. I kept climbing. 3rd floor, the car sound got louder, then faded. I figured they'd driven down the exit ramp on the far side. I reached the 3rd floor landing and glanced out across the level. Empty. Just rows of painted lines and concrete pillars. A few overhead lights, most of them out. Then I saw the car. It was moving slowly along the far end of the level, headlights off. Just the daytime running lights, those dim LED strips. A dark saloon, maybe a Ford or a Vauxhall. Hard to tell in the low light. It cruised past one of the pillars and disappeared around the corner toward the up-ramp. I watched it go, then kept climbing. 4th floor now. My gut did this little flip, nothing major, just a weird feeling. The car had been going so slowly, and why no headlights? I told myself I was being paranoid. Someone forgot to turn them on. Or maybe they were looking for their space, couldn't remember where they'd parked. Happens all the time. I reached the 4th floor landing and stopped to catch my breath. Leaned against the railing, looked out over the level. The car was there again. Same car, same slow crawl. It was on the opposite side of the floor now, maybe 50 meters away, and just rolling along at walking pace. Still no headlights. I couldn't see inside. The windscreen caught the orange glow from the security lights, just a dark reflective surface. I stood there watching it. It reached the end of the row, turned, and headed up the ramp to the 5th floor. My floor. I felt that sinking feeling in my chest, the kind you get when you know something's wrong, but you can't quite put your finger on it. I thought about going back down, maybe waiting in the stairwell until the car left, but that felt stupid. I was probably overreacting. It was just someone driving around. Maybe they were lost. Maybe they were on the phone and driving slow because they were distracted. I kept climbing. 5th floor, my car was parked near the middle, a blue Fiesta, about 4 years old. I could see it from the stairwell and was sitting under one of the few working lights. The other car was there too. It was parked 2 spaces away from mine. Engine running, I could hear it now, a low idle. Still no headlights, just sitting there. I stopped on the landing, one hand on the railing. My heart was going faster now. I tried to think it through. Maybe they'd just parked. Maybe they were waiting for someone, a pickup or a drop-off. But at midnight, in an empty car park, I thought about calling someone. My flatmate, maybe, or the non-emergency police line. But what would I even say? There's a car parked near mine and I don't like it. They'd think I was insane. I waited, maybe a full minute, just standing there on the landing watching. The car didn't move. No one got out. I couldn't see anyone inside, but the windows were tinted or just too dark to make out. And finally, I convinced myself I was being ridiculous. I walked out onto the level, keys in my hand, and headed toward my car. I kept my eyes on the other car the whole time. 30 meters, 20. My gut was screaming at me to turn around, but I ignored it. I reached my car, unlocked it, got in, locked the doors immediately. My hands were shaking a little. I started the engine, checked my mirrors. The other car was still sitting there, 2 spaces over. I couldn't see the driver, couldn't see anything. I reversed out, turned, and headed for the down ramp. I glanced in my rearview mirror as I drove away. The car pulled out and followed me. Not fast, not aggressive, just the same slow crawl, staying about 10 meters behind. My stomach dropped. I took the ramp down to the 4th floor, trying to stay calm. Maybe they were just leaving too. Coincidence. But when I reached the 4th floor and started across it toward the next ramp, the car stayed behind me. Same distance, same speed. I sped up a little. So did they. 3rd floor, still behind me. I thought about stopping, confronting them, asking what the hell they wanted. But every instinct told me that was a terrible idea. I kept driving. 2nd floor, I was going faster now, maybe too fast for a car park. My tires squealing a little on the turns. The other car matched my speed. 1st floor, I could see the exit now, the barrier arm, the ticket machine. I fumbled for my parking ticket in the cup holder, hands shaking. The car was still behind me. I reached the barrier, shoved the ticket into the machine. It took forever to process. I kept checking my mirror. The car had stopped about 5 meters back, just sitting there, engine idling. The barrier lifted, I drove through, out onto the main road, and didn't stop. I drove straight home, checking my mirrors the whole way. The car didn't follow me out of the car park. It just sat there at the barrier, waiting. I never saw it again. I don't know who it was or what they wanted. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I overreacted, but I think about it a lot. I should have called the police. I should have done something. I don't park on the 5th floor anymore. I don't even use that car park. I'd rather pay for the one closer to work, even though it's more expensive. I still don't know what would have happened if I'd stayed on that 5th floor a little longer, or if I'd walked to my car a little slower. I don't think I want to know. The night shift at the Riverside Hotel paid an extra £2 an hour. That's why I took it. I'd been working reception there for about 4 months, mostly covering weekends and the occasional overnight when someone called in sick. The hotel wasn't anything special. 3 floors, maybe 40 rooms, the kind of place that mostly got traveling salespeople and families passing through on their way to somewhere more interesting. I clocked in at 11 p.m. The evening receptionist, Claire, was already putting on her coat. She walked me through the handover. 3 check-ins expected before midnight, a couple in room 214 who'd complained about the radiator, and a note that the coffee machine in the breakfast area was making a grinding noise again. Standard stuff. She left at 1:15, and then it was just me in the empty lobby. Yet the first hour was quiet. I restocked the leaflet holders by the door, answered an email from someone asking about accessible rooms, and ate the sandwich I'd brought from home. The lobby had that particular silence that comes late at night in public buildings. The hum of the vending machine by the stairs, the occasional creak of the building settling, the faint sound of a television from one of the rooms above. I didn't mind it. I'd grown up in a loud house, 4 younger siblings, so the quiet felt like a luxury. The first check-in happened at 12:14 a.m. I heard the automatic doors slide open and looked up from my phone. A man walked in, maybe mid-40s, wearing a dark coat and carrying a small wheeled suitcase. He approached the desk without smiling. "Checking in," he said. "Name's Martin Hale." I pulled up the reservation system. I found his booking, 1 night, single room. Paid in advance online. Room 308. I printed the key card, explained that breakfast started at 7, and handed everything over. He took the key without a word and walked toward the lift. I watched him go, then went back to scrolling. Maybe 20 minutes later, I went to the back office to make a cup of tea. When I came back, I noticed he'd left a pen on the counter. Black ballpoint, nothing distinctive. I put it in the lost property drawer and forgot about it. The second check-in happened at 2:09 a.m. I was half dozing in the chair when the doors opened again. I sat up quickly, trying to look alert. Another man walked in. Different coat this time, navy instead of black, but the same suitcase. Same walk, same face. He stopped at the desk. "Checking in, Martin Hale." I blinked at him. "Sorry, I think there's been a mistake. You already checked in. About 2 hours ago. Room 308. He stared at me. No recognition, no confusion, just blank. "I'm checking in now," he said. "Martin Hale." I pulled up the system again, thinking maybe I'd misread the name earlier. But no. Martin Hale, room 308, checked in at 12:14 a.m. I looked back at him. "You've already got a room. I gave you the key." He didn't blink. "I'd like to check in." Something felt off. My gut was telling me this wasn't right, but I couldn't put my finger on why. Maybe he'd had too much to drink. Maybe he'd forgotten. People do strange things when they're tired. I tried to keep my voice calm. "I can call up to your room if you've lost your key card." "I'd like to check in," he repeated. Same tone, same blank expression. I didn't know what else to do. Yet I told him I'd need to speak to the duty manager, but he just stood there staring at me for another 10 seconds, then turned and walked back out through the automatic doors. I watched him go, my heart beating a little faster than it should have been. I told myself I was being paranoid. Night shifts mess with your head. I'd probably misremembered his face. Lots of middle-aged men in dark coats looked the same. I checked the system again. Martin Hale, room 308, checked in at 12:14 a.m. No second booking, no duplicate name. I almost called the police then. I had my phone in my hand, 999 half-typed, but I stopped. What would I even say? A man tried to check in twice? They'd think I was wasting their time. I put the phone down and made another cup of tea instead. The third time, I was ready for it. The doors opened at 4:03 a.m. Same man, and same suitcase, same coat. This time it was brown. He walked up to the desk like we'd never met. "Checking in," he said. "Martin Hale?" I didn't answer right away. I just looked at him, trying to see any flicker of recognition, any sign that he was messing with me. Nothing. His face was completely neutral. Not threatening, not angry, just blank. "You've been here twice already," I said. My voice was steadier than I felt. "I don't know what you're doing, but you need to leave." He tilted his head slightly like he was considering this. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a key card. He placed it on the desk between us. Room 308. The one I'd given him 4 hours earlier. "I'd like to check in," he said again. That's when I stood up. Every instinct told me to get away from the desk, away from him, and I stepped back toward the office door, keeping my eyes on him. "I'm calling the police," I said. He didn't react, just stood there, staring at me with that empty expression. Then, after what felt like a full minute, he picked up the key card, turned, and walked back out. I watched him through the glass doors as he crossed the car park and got into a silver car I hadn't noticed before. He sat in the driver's seat for a moment, then drove away. I locked the office door and called the police. They arrived about 20 minutes later. 2 officers, a man and a woman, both looking tired. I explained what had happened. They checked the car park CCTV, but the angle didn't cover where he'd parked. They went up to room 308. Empty. Bed not slept in. No luggage, no sign anyone had been there. They took a statement, told me to call if he came back, and left. I sat in the locked office until my shift ended at 7. Claire came in and found me still sitting there, staring at the desk. I told her I wasn't feeling well and went home. I never saw him again. The booking for Martin Hale stayed in the system, paid in advance, checked in at 12:14 a.m., never checked out. I asked the day manager to look into it, but the payment had been made with a prepaid card that couldn't be traced. No phone number on file, no email that worked. I quit 2 weeks later. I told them it was because I'd found something closer to home, which was true, but that wasn't the real reason. I couldn't shake the feeling that he'd come back, that he'd keep coming back every 2 hours, asking to check in with the same name, until I let him. I still think about it. I don't know what he wanted. I don't know if it was some kind of game or if he was testing me or if there was something wrong with him I didn't understand. I never got answers, but sometimes late at night I think about that blank expression and wonder what would have happened if I'd given him another key. The ticket booth smelled like old coffee and salt air. I'd been working at the ferry terminal for about 7 months, covering the overnight shift, Friday through Monday. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid better than my last job at the call center, and most nights were quiet. Just me, a security guard who did rounds every few hours, and whoever was catching the late ferries to the islands. The terminal itself was pretty basic. A small waiting area with rows of plastic seats, a ticket booth where I sat, and glass doors leading out to the dock. There were 3 ferries that ran overnight, one at midnight, one at 2 a.m., and one at 4. After that, nothing until 6 when the day shift started. The midnight ferry was usually busy, weekenders heading home. The 2 a.m. was hit or miss. The 4 a.m. was almost always empty. It was a Friday night, or technically Saturday morning by then. I'd sold maybe 15 tickets for the midnight ferry, watched it leave on time, and settled in with my phone for the quiet stretch. The security guard, Martin, had done his first round at 12:30 and wouldn't be back until around 2. I was scrolling through my sister's Instagram. She'd just gotten engaged and was posting about it constantly, when I heard the glass doors open. A man walked in, maybe mid-40s, wearing a dark coat and jeans. He had a backpack slung over one shoulder. He walked up to the booth and asked about the next ferry. 2 a.m., I told him. Goes to St. Kilda, stops at Barra, then Harris. 45 pounds for a single, 70 for return. He nodded, pulled out his wallet, and paid for a single. Cash. I printed the ticket, handed it over, and he went to sit in the waiting area. Nothing unusual. I went back to my phone. The 2 a.m. ferry arrived on time. I watched through the window as the handful of passengers boarded, maybe 6 or 7 people total. The man with the backpack walked out with them. I saw him step onto the ramp, then pause. He stood there for a moment, just looking at the ferry. Then he turned around and walked back inside. I looked up as he approached the booth again. "Miss the boat?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. It happened sometimes. People got nervous, changed their minds, had second thoughts about the crossing. He didn't answer right away, just stood there looking at me. Then he said, "When's the next one?" 4 a.m. Same route, same price. He paid again, another 45 pounds cash. I printed another ticket. But he went back to the waiting area and sat in the same seat as before. I figured maybe he'd had a panic attack or something. The crossing could be rough this time of year, and some people didn't handle boats well. I didn't think much of it. I texted my flatmate about needing milk, updated the log, and made myself another cup of instant coffee from the machine in the back. Martin came by at 2:15. We chatted for a bit. He was telling me about his daughter's school play, and then he left to check the dock area. The man in the waiting area didn't move the whole time, just sat there, staring at the doors. By 3:30, I was getting tired. It was that dead zone of the night where your body just wants to shut down. I'd finished my coffee and was considering making another when I noticed the man stand up. He walked to the doors, looked out at the dock, then came back and sat down again. The 4 a.m. ferry arrived at 3:58. I watched the same thing happen. He walked out with the 2 other passengers, an older couple who looked like they'd been traveling all night, and stepped onto the ramp. This time he made it further. He actually got on the ferry. I saw him disappear inside. Then, maybe 30 seconds later, he came back out, walked down the ramp, back through the doors, and straight up to my booth. "When's the next one?" he asked. My gut was telling me something was off now. This wasn't nerves. This was something else. 6 a.m., I said. "But that's the first day ferry. It'll be busy. Is everything okay?" He didn't answer, just paid again. Another 45 pounds. I printed the ticket, and he went back to the same seat. I thought about calling Martin, or maybe the police. But what would I even say? A man bought 3 ferry tickets and didn't get on the boat? That wasn't illegal. Maybe he was having some kind of crisis. Maybe he was meeting someone and they kept not showing up. I told myself I was overreacting, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I pulled up the terminal's CCTV feed on the computer. We had cameras covering the waiting area, the dock, and the ticket booth. I scrolled back through the footage from the midnight ferry. Watched him pay, sit down, walk out, stop at the ramp, and turn back. Then I checked the 2 a.m. ferry. Same thing. He got closer that time, but still turned back. The 4 a.m. ferry, he actually boarded. I watched him step inside, move toward the seating area, then stop. He stood there for maybe 20 seconds, now completely still, then turned and walked back out. I looked up at the waiting area. He was still sitting there, staring at the doors. Martin came back at 4:30. I asked him if he'd seen the guy before, if he'd noticed anything strange. Martin shrugged and said the guy had been sitting there every time he'd done a round, but he hadn't caused any trouble. Probably just nervous about the crossing, he said. I didn't mention the 3 tickets. By 5:30, the sky was starting to lighten. I could see the first hints of dawn through the windows. A few early passengers started arriving for the 6 a.m. ferry. A family with 2 kids, a man in a suit, a couple of backpackers. The man in the dark coat stood up and joined them at the doors. I watched as they all boarded. The family went first, then the backpackers, then the man in the suit. The man in the dark coat was last. He stepped onto the ramp, walked up to the ferry entrance and stopped. This time he turned and looked back at the terminal, directly at the window, directly at me. Then he turned back around and boarded the ferry. I watched the boat pull away from the dock, watched it disappear into the early morning mist. My shift ended at 6, and the day staff arrived right on time. I handed over the log, grabbed my coat, and left. I never saw him again. I don't know if he actually stayed on the ferry that time, or if he got off at one of the islands and came back on a later boat. I don't know why he kept buying tickets and not getting on. I don't know why he looked at me like that. Martin said he didn't see anything unusual on the CCTV after I left. The man just disappeared into the crowd. I still work the overnight shift, but I think about it every time someone buys a ticket and doesn't board. Every time someone stands at the ramp too long. Every time someone looks back at the terminal before getting on. I should have called the police, or at least asked him directly what was going on. But I didn't. I told myself it wasn't my business, that he was just another passenger. But my gut was telling me something else, and I didn't listen.